Good afternoon and welcome to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors Land Use and Transportation Committee. I'm Scott Wiener, the Vice Chair of the committee, joined by Supervisor Aaron Peskin, a member of the committee. Our Chair, Supervisor Malia Cohen, is currently in the Rules Committee for a different item. She will be here shortly and will take the chair when she gets here, but we're going to start the meeting now. Mr. Clerk, are there any announcements?
Yes, please silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the July 26, 2016 Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Thank you, and I want to thank SFG-TV for broadcasting today's hearing. Mr. Clerk, can you please call item number 1?
Item number 1, ordinance amending the administrative code to create a fourth preference for people who live or work in San Francisco in addition to the existing preference in allocating city affordable housing units, and to create an additional category of eligible displaced tenants that include tenants displaced by fire.
Thank you. So this item is an item that I introduced. It sort of had a long and windy path. The original legislation was to codify a practice that had frequently but not always been applied around affordable housing, and that is to provide a preference for our affordable housing lottery for people who live or work in San Francisco. We work very hard and we invest scarce resources to create affordable housing in San Francisco. And we want to make sure that our own people, our own residents, people who live here, people who work here, have the first priority in accessing that affordable housing. And so although the Mayor's Office of Housing had usually but not always applied that preference, it was long past due for us to codify this preference and to make sure that our own people have the highest priority in accessing affordable housing. And so that is what the legislation provided when I introduced it and continues to provide today. In the middle of this legislative process, we decided to add an additional preference, and that is a preference for people who are burned out of their units in terms of accessing affordable housing. We have had just an epidemic of fires in our apartment buildings, most significantly in the Mission District, but elsewhere. And I have seen over time, as a member of the Board of Supervisors, going back to 2011 when we had a serial arsonist burning apartment buildings in the Castro, to today when we see the just unacceptably high number of fires in apartment buildings in and around the Mission, that when these fires happen, it is just disastrous for the tenants who are burned out of their units. And it is very traumatic no matter who you are. If without any warning you just lose your apartment, you lose your belongings, and you have to find alternative housing while your unit is being fixed. But for someone who is lower income, it can have an absolutely devastating impact on your ability to stay housed, to remain in the city. And we need to make sure that we are helping particularly our lower income tenants who are burned out of their units. So the legislation, in addition to providing a preference for people who live or work in San Francisco, provides a preference as well for tenants who are displaced due to a fire. They will receive the same preference as people who are evicted under the Ellis Act or pursuant to owner move-in evictions. So I want to thank the committee and the board for its patience as we have crafted this legislation to be broader and to really go as far as we need to go to protect our fire victims, as well as making sure that our own residents have a fair shot at accessing affordable housing. So after public comment, I will ask the committee to forward this item to the full board with a positive recommendation. And with that, we will open up item 1 to public comment. Is there any public comment on item 1? Seeing none, public comment is closed. And Supervisor, or I will make a motion to forward item 1 to the full board with a positive recommendation.
Without objection.
Without objection, that will be the order. Okay, item number 2.
Just to restate, item number 1 was recommended to the Board of Supervisors with recommendation.
That's correct.
With Chair Cohen being absent.
Yes.
Item number 2, resolution granting revocable permission to the Municipal Transportation Agency to occupy portions of the public right-of-way to install and maintain 3 new operator convenience facilities at the terminus of various minibus routes.
So this item has been presented by the Municipal Transportation Agency, which is part of a continuing program to make sure that bus operators have facilities they can use during their runs, which has been a huge challenge over the years for many of our bus drivers. The MTA is here with a presentation. I would ask that you make it extremely abbreviated. This committee we've dealt with this issue a number of times, so we don't need a full presentation. But if you want to just give us the very brief encapsulation, that would be great.
I'm actually was also going to present from Public Works. Did you want me to give a brief overview of my review, or did you want to go straight to the presentation from
However
MTA?
you'd like to do it. Just an overview. But
Mine would have been just a list of all the approvals. So
okay, why don't you just state that, and then we'll go to the MTA.
okay. So as he stated, this is for the SFMTA major encroachment for the convenience centers for 20th Avenue and Buckingham Way, 2055 Sunnydale Avenue, Park Ridge Drive, and Burnett Avenue. On October 19th, 2012, the planning department determined that it was in conformity with the general plan. On October 17th, 2012, the certificate of determination exemption from environmental review determined it was exempt from environmental review. Each item was brought through at the Transportation Advisory Staff Committee on December 20th, 2012, and recommendation of approval for each of the restroom locations. The San Francisco Arts Commission approved the design of the prefabricated restrooms for the proposed restroom locations on July 16, 2012 by resolution number 0910-12-227, and a public hearing was held on February 24, 2016 for this item and was recommended to be approved.
Thank you. And was there any opposition at the public hearing?
Yes, there were two opposition types. One would be more for suggesting different locations, just for the sake of a new location. And the second was related to safety, visibility, and aesthetics.
Oh, which location or locations?
I believe it was the one, which one? It was the Park Ridge location.
Okay, it was 2 people?
Yes, 2 people.
Okay. Great. And I see that there was full canvassing and mailed notice to 300-foot radius.
Correct.
And and there was a community meeting at the Noe Valley Public Library.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. And can you just talk about how the canvassing works?
Okay, sure.
There's the mail notice and the canvassing. When you get,
Sure. My name is Robert Mao. I'm the project manager for this project with SFMTA. So the 3 locations were chosen based on the proximity to the terminal and also considering what available resources we have or facility near the terminal. Each of these terminals do not have existing facilities that operator can use.
Can you talk into the microphone?
Sorry about that. Currently, the operators do not have access to restrooms within these locations. So as a result, MTA Task Force for the operator restroom identified these locations, and we decided to build the restrooms based on the recommendations of the task force and the operator restroom facility representatives. Each of these units are going to be within 100 feet from the terminal, and we first go through a process of reviewing the restroom based on the task force. Then we go through the design and then present it to the community. We do public outreach. We go through email, mailers, and also community meetings. Different sites require different types of outreach, but we always have community meetings at a convenience location. The mailers include multiple languages describing the needs and the project sites. For the first project site that's in Sunnydale, we're proposing to put in a bulb out on the north side of Sunnydale, right across from John McLaren Middle School. This unit will be adjacent to the Park and Rec facility. We reached out to Rec and Park as well, and we determined that there was no impact to the accessing the park. We will build 2 new curb ramps as part of the site upgrade to allow pedestrian crossing across Sunnydale. The next site is Park Ridge and Burnett. We're also providing a bulb out. The unit will be just the west of the existing bus terminal. There will not be any impact to the path of travel, so we do not require curb ramps. And lastly, the site is at 20th and Buckingham for the 18 and 91 hour lines. Currently, the restroom around there, we're using McDonald's and Trader Joe's. Unfortunately, those 2 facilities will be closed around midnight when the 91 hour service starts from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. So as a result, the task force presented a proposed location at 19th and Buckingham. But after the Arts Commission considered the site, we were recommended to move the location down to 20th and Buckingham. So the design was revised, and currently we're presenting it at the corner of 20th and Buckingham on the northwest corner. We're also proposing to upgrade the curb ramps so that pedestrians can cross the entrance to the parking lot with the ADA path. Any questions?
No, just another question. In terms of the canvassing that was done at Park Ridge, in addition to the mailer to within 300 feet, what was that canvassing? Was that door to door, or
Correct.
like knocking on people's doors?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, appreciate the presentation. On item 2, is there any public comment? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. And Supervisor Peskin, could I have a motion to forward item 2 to the full board with a positive recommendation?
So moved.
Okay, without objection, that will be the order. Item number 3.
Just to restate, item 2 is recommended to the Board of Supervisors with Chair Cohen being absent. Item number 3, ordinance amending the planning code to define wireless telecommunication services facilities, create distinct WTS facilities, land use controls, and among other things, require a conditional use authorization for macro WTS facilities in most Article 2, 7, and 8 districts, regulate micro WTS facilities in all districts, require that a WTS facility CU shall expire after 10 years, regulate W2S facilities in certain Mission Bay districts and P districts, exempt certain telecommunication equipment accessory uses from height limitations, allow screening elements for W2S facilities to exceed height limits consistent with existing height limits exemptions for antennas, define and regulate temporary W2S facilities, allow the Historic Preservation Commission to delegate determinations on applications for administrative certification of appropriateness and minor permits to alter to Planning Department staff.
And Supervisor Avalos is the author of item 3, and he has joined us. Supervisor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Supervisor Wiener. This is an ordinance that is one of a series of other ordinances that we've had before the Board of Supervisors. Back in December of 2010, I had originally passed an ordinance that was looking at aesthetics for wireless telecommunication services facilities. In my district, we have, and across the city, but I see it in my district, we have a number of telephone poles and wireless facilities in the public right-of-way, and we have very obtrusive WTS facilities, so where you can just see, huge apparatus descending down from poles or sticking out into sidewalks from poles. And so we've done a lot of work over the years to make sure that we can put some conditions in place that would require the providers to create some sense of community and neighborhood by having smaller facilities in place. This ordinance is in that vein and is now updating the work that's been done over the years. And Omar Masri from the planning department has been a big part of this. So this ordinance will update some of the city's rules for cell phone towers and antennas. The proposed changes will allow planning to work with neighborhoods and with wireless carriers to ensure the least intrusive, or I call them obtrusive, means possible of providing robust and competitive wireless services. This ordinance will ensure that these wireless facilities are appropriately designed for our distinct and historic neighborhoods. The proposed changes were drafted by the planning department staff based on both lessons learned from over 1,500 existing commercial wireless facilities in San Francisco, as well as an eye toward the future trends in wireless facilities. In addition, the changes would strengthen the goals of the wireless siting guidelines by revising some current planning code provisions that may have unintentionally resulted in the wireless carriers pursuing a more intrusive or obtrusive location or design. The proposed changes were provided by planning department staff to nearly every neighborhood group in San Francisco that is registered with the planning department, as well as representatives for various wireless carriers. A number of community members expressed support for the proposed changes. The San Francisco Planning Commission unanimously supported this ordinance on June 16th of this year. The primary changes being proposed include creating a 10-year time limit for certain larger wireless facilities if they require a conditional use authorization, exempting screen elements such as faux vent pipes or elevator penthouses that are used to screen antennas from height limits, which is consistent with the current exemptions for unscreened antennas and towers. However, such facilities would still remain subject to design, historic preservation, and shadow review, as well as any limitations imposed by the Planning Commission. This ordinance also sets definitions for micro and macro wireless telecommunication services facilities. Aaron Starr, who was up at the podium before, from the Planning Department, is here to provide a brief report and answer any questions. Mr. Starr.
Thank you, Supervisor Avalos. Given your extensive explanation of the ordinance, I think I will just say that on June 16th of this year, the Planning Commission voted unanimously to recommend approval, with the addition of a finding to encourage the use of cleaner fuels for any backup power generators used at these facilities. I would also note that Omar Masri, who worked on the proposed changes, is here to answer questions. He's no longer with the Planning Department and has joined the Mayor's Office of Short-Term Rentals, but has graciously agreed to attend today's hearing to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I thought that was the city administrator's office.
I guess it does fall under the city administrator, but it's the short-term rental office. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Got that cleared up?
So at this point, we'll go to public comment. Is there any public comment on item 3? Please come forward.
Hi, I'm Dan Cody. What effect, if any, would this have on community rooftop wireless, such as Monkey Brains or just private Wi-Fi?
I actually use Monkey Brains technology, and I don't think this would affect it at all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any additional public comment? Seeing none, public comment is closed. And if there are no concluding comments, I'll entertain a motion. And by the way, I think Supervisor Farrell. Okay. I'll entertain a motion to forward item 3 to the full board with positive recommendation. Supervisor Peskin?
So moved.
Okay, and without objection, that'll be the order. Item number 4.
Item number 3 was recommended to the Board of Supervisors, with Chair Cohen being absent. Item number 4, ordinance amending the planning code to allow the construction of accessible dwelling units, known also as secondary or in-law units, on all lots in city in the city in areas that allow residential use, amending the administrative code to revise the definition of rental units as it applies to ADUs.
Okay, Supervisor Farrell is the lead author of this item, which I'm co-sponsoring, and Supervisor Farrell is joining us. Supervisor.
Thank you, Supervisor Wiener, Chair Wiener, and thank you for your support on this item. You know, colleagues, in order to significantly address our housing shortage and crisis, I do believe we need to be adding all types of units of housing here in our city, and that ADUs are a real tool to address our housing shortage, certainly in the near-term crisis, because they also tend to be more affordable by design. The creation of ADUs seems to be a little bit less contentious to our residents than new residential housing construction, although not fraught without risk in that regard. But also because a number of these, or all of these, can be permanently rent-controlled units. Many of them certainly can be. So the proposal in front of us today has the potential to realize tens of thousands of new units over time, and I do believe represents a meaningful housing policy that we should all be proud of here at the board. I want to say from the outset that, before we describe the components of the ordinance, acknowledge Supervisor Peskin and his leadership on this issue as well. For a while here, we've had separate measures, dare say competing measures on this item, but we've been in direct communication and contact and reached a compromise on moving this policy forward. As a result, after the board vote on this item, I'm going to be withdrawing our ADU ordinance from the ballot for this November in an effort to whittle that down. Our goal and intention is to get this done through the legislative process, and these amendments that we're introducing today represent the intent of that compromise. In terms of the proposal itself, first and foremost, our proposal is going to continue to allow the creation of unlimited ADUs in buildings with 5 or more units, and would cap new ADUs at no more than 1 unit in buildings that are 4 units or less. This proposal also retains the existing successful seismic program in its current form. The seismic program has been one of the most successful programs in producing ADUs and is a low-cost way for our city to add badly needed new housing. This measure doesn't permit the construction of new ADUs in buildings who have had no-fault evictions or OMI evictions in the past 10 years, and doesn't permit any new ADU to be used as short-term rentals. As part of our discussion and compromise, part of the amendments we'll be introducing will also be part of what we'll be voting on the board tomorrow. So a few of those, we're going to be removing the component that would allow no more than 20-25% reduction in commercial storefront to form a new ADU. We have come to an agreement that to add in the portion Supervisor Peskin's proposal that creates minimum square foot unit size, although I understand planning might have some comments around that disallows unit mergers, and the portion that ensures proper neighborhood notice and new construction during expansions. We're also amending in language that clearly states it's not our intention to impose any new vacancy controls. And we're also adding in language that clarifies that the subdivision and separate sale of a new ADU can only happen in buildings that were complete ownership or condo buildings. The components and new amendments that I just mentioned represent a deal and a compromise moving forward with one ADU policy, and also avert going to the ballot with this measure. I do think great things can happen here at our board when we come together. I do want to thank Supervisor Wiener for his co-sponsorship and strong leadership on this issue, and quite frankly was the first person to introduce an ADU policy with his district last year and have it pass at the full board. So I want to thank him for his continued leadership on this issue, and especially here to Supervisor Peskin, also for his time in hammering out the details. I do believe this will have a significant impact on our housing policy citywide, realizing many, many new units in the tens of thousands, and colleagues would certainly ask for your support. And I think after public comment, I could certainly read the amendments into the record.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor Farrell, and I just want to note that I think we're moving in a really positive direction in terms of acknowledging that some of the most easy to create and least impactful and most affordable new housing units that we can produce are these accessory dwelling units within existing structures, interspersed in neighborhoods without any kind of concentration. It's a really powerful way to produce good housing in our neighborhoods. And so, as Supervisor Farrell mentioned, I have authored 3 pieces of legislation to allow for ADUs. The first was in the Castro, which we then extended to all of District 8. I then separately authored legislation to allow people to add in-law units into buildings that are undergoing either mandatory or voluntary seismic retrofit. The seismic in-law unit legislation has been very successful with, I think, approximately 100 permits so far, understanding that it is a wind-up to seek those permits. You have to decide whether to do it, hire an architect, et cetera. So we're really pleased with the early success of the seismic program. And as I mentioned in the last hearing on this, on Supervisor Peskin's legislation, that it was critically important to me that the seismic program not in any way be undermined. And so I understand there will be amendments today to ensure that that is not the case. I also just want to note there has been a series of emails that I and others have received from people in the Noe Valley neighborhood, which contain some statements that I believe are not accurate. From the beginning, the idea behind the ADU legislation was to focus on the existing envelope of the building. The legislation that Supervisor Farrell and I have put forward basically also allows that if you already have a structure that impinges into the rear yard, most commonly a deck, and there is space underneath that structure, you can use that space for an ADU. It does not allow impingement into the rear yard beyond what has already been impinged by a deck or whatever the structure is. So I think it's important to make that clear, and we can discuss that issue for sure. But these emails that I've been getting, unfortunately, dramatically oversimplify the issue and make it seem like this legislation somehow willy-nilly allows impingement under the rear yard. That is not accurate, and I think it's important to correct the record because we have received a series of emails. So with that, Supervisor Farrell, Supervisor Peskin.
So first of all, let me thank Supervisor Farrell for working with me and my office in good faith, and I'm delighted that we have come or are very close to coming to a consensus piece of legislation. And also let me put it in a larger historical context that precedes, I think, any of our tenures, including mine on the Board of Supervisors. The in-law unit issue, or secondary unit issue as it used to be called, today commonly referred to as accessory dwelling units, has been the third rail of housing politics in San Francisco literally for decades. This is a piece of, this is an area of policy that Supervisor Terrence Hallinan unsuccessfully took a run at, Supervisor Mabel Tang, Supervisor Tom Amiano. In my day in 2002, 14 years ago, I introduced legislation to incentivize the creation of accessory dwelling units within 1,250 feet of major transit corridors, which was the subject of great controversy and ultimately was not passed by this board. I was delighted years later when my successor, David Chu, introduced legislation that was similar to mine, and then as Supervisor Wiener stated, he introduced legislation, a pilot program for District 8 that was made permanent, and subsequently my predecessor introduced legislation for District 3. So I really see this as part of a long evolution, and I'm delighted that there is interest from all segments of the board. Interestingly enough, when my legislation in 2002 failed, it did not fall along the common ideological lines of the day. As I recall, Supervisor Jake McGoldrick sided with Supervisor Tony Hall to help defeat that legislation. And today I am delighted that the solution that we're moving forward with transcends the political lines that often divide us. So with that as a little bit of background, I think that there were some fundamental differences between the two pieces of legislation that are now becoming the subject of one piece of consensus legislation around a number of technical areas that I think are best solved here with the public and with experts and department staff with us doing our job as legislators in the legislative chambers of the board as opposed to the ballot. Having said that, one of those areas where there was, I think, significant difference between the legislation that I had proposed and the legislation that Supervisor Farrell and Supervisor Wiener proposed, and maybe this is a technical misunderstanding, but I think that the emails that we've been getting over the weekend and today actually have to do with a provision in the in Supervisor Farrell that says that at the ground floor one could build an ADU in the buildable envelope as opposed to within the existing building. Now, there is a zoning administrator bulletin number 4, which has been discussed as to what can be enclosed and what cannot be enclosed. And I tried to refine that in amendments that I made in this committee last week underneath decks that are attached, in stairwells, light wells where there is a blank wall, etc. But I think actually, and this may not be what was intended, that the actual language in Farrell says in the buildable envelope, period. It doesn't say under cantilevered roofs, it does under cantilevered decks. It doesn't say in conjunction with zoning administrator bulletin number 4. So I actually think that for those of you who emailed us about that issue, that is, I think, a profoundly important issue that I don't think should be in the legislation, and ultimately, as a result of mine and Supervisor Farrell's conversations, came out of the legislation. It may not be what it was intended, but I am worried that as we proceed with this, given the decades of controversy, that we do it in a way that is not controversial, that will be embraced, so that we actually see these units being built. And I would like to go a step further, which is it is not enough for the board to merely pass this legislation. I think it is incumbent on the city, and I want to thank Janan New and the San Francisco Apartment Association and representatives of the planning and building departments who are interested in launching a program very consistent with our mandatory seismic retrofit effort, where the city affirmatively reaches out to the thousands and thousands of property owners who could avail themselves of this tool, give them technical assistance, show them whether or not it is an economically viable alternative for them, help them go through the system, get the contractors, make process improvements, particularly on the planning side. We have now talked to a number of applicants who are going through the process, and there are definitely process improvements and streamlining that can happen both in DBI and in planning, but particularly in planning. I think there may be some amendments that we need to make in the future to allow the zoning administrator to delegate authority to staff so that it doesn't take months and months for a regulatory agreement to be reviewed and signed, particularly around issues of impact fees. And fundamentally, we also, I think, need to work with the lending community to make sure that there is a loan product out there that small property owners can avail themselves of to invest the $100,000, $200,000 that it's going to cost to build one of these units. I think given what rents are today, even with the provisions, the Costa-Hawkins provisions in here that allow regulatory agreements, that many property owners will find that this is a good investment that not only raises the value of their property, but creates an income stream that will allow them to recoup that investment, principal and interest, in a very reasonable amount of time, and then cash flow that to the benefit of those small property owners to make ends meet. And large property owners, I think with the changes that I made that were consistent, interestingly enough, sorry to interrupt myself, but interestingly enough, I used the caps that came out of Supervisor Wiener's legislation for District 8. And Supervisor, I just want to say that imitation is the highest form of flattery. But I understand Supervisor Farrell's desire to raise those caps. So I am fine with those amendments. As a matter of fact, made them last week in committee. And so those two pieces, that provision is the same in both of our pieces of legislation. I think there are still a few very small outstanding issues. One with regard to subdivision, and I want to thank Supervisor Wiener's staff for proposing, I think, a great compromise that Supervisor Farrell is going to introduce. We also have a request for further clarification to what I think both pieces of legislation intended relative to language that makes it abundantly clear that these units were never intended to be subject to vacancy control. And so I want to thank Ms. New for some language that I assume Supervisor Farrell has and will introduce. And then finally, there is some language in section 307 it starts on page 18 and finishes on page 19. It is a technical sentence that I believe needs to be added to either or both pieces of legislation. We could add it here, which says that nothing in this section shall be interpreted as allowing for an existing non-conforming use to be deemed conforming. And then finally, I have two other amendments which I think I can offer tomorrow. One is to clarify that in the negotiations and discussions that Supervisor Farrell and I had, that I will remove, this goes to the issue of subdivision, which is what we agreed to, is that in existing apartment buildings, any new AD units would not be subdividable, but in existing condominium units, they would be subdividable and they could be mapped. And you will recall that last week I had a provision that said any such units would be BMRs at 120% of area median income. I have agreed as a matter of incentive to remove that BMR 120% of AMI provision. Let me further clarify that relative to the existing Supervisor Wiener's existing mandatory seismic retrofit program, that you could subdivide if in the future you won the condo lottery, which will be many, many years from now. And then finally, I have some further clarifications with regard to the definition of the built envelope, to further clarify the sections of Zoning Administrator Bulletin Number 4, which I can make at the full board tomorrow. But for those of you who are ADU aficionados, I will say that it reads as follows. For purposes of this provision, the built envelope shall include the open area under a cantilevered room or room built on columns, decks, except for decks that encroach into the required rear yard, or decks that are supported by columns or walls other than the building wall to which it is attached, and are multi-level or more than 10 feet above grade, and light well infills provided that the infill will be against a blank neighboring wall at the property line and not visible from any off-site location, as these spaces exist as of July 11th, 2016, and except for any of these spaces that encroach on the required rear yard. In the event that an ADU is built in any of these additional spaces, such construction shall require notice pursuant to Planning Code sections 311 or 312. That concludes my comments for now.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin, and I think this has been a really good and collaborative process, so I think we're on a good path. And in terms of the deck et al. Issue, that has always been the intent, so I don't think there's been any difference in terms of what was intended, and we can always have, obviously there can be different interpretations, and so that's what the legislative process is for, to make sure that the language is as clear as possible, and it sounds like we're heading in that direction, and that'll be a good thing. So at this point, we have a number of amendments that have been articulated, and there'll be more discussion about that after public comment. I do want to, one other issue I want to raise has to do with potential minimum square footage, and then we talked about it in the last hearing, and I expressed a concern that I believe Supervisor Peskin was proposing that there be a minimum of 350 square feet for an ADU that's a studio, and I believe 550 square feet for an ADU that's a one-bedroom. I think those are the square footages. And I expressed a concern that first of all, we have a minimum square footage in effect in San Francisco, and I don't see a point in deviating from that, but it could also cause problems. And I do understand that from the planning department that there are a number of units currently in the pipeline that would be disallowed under this legislation. So I'm curious. I think if the planning department could talk to us about that.
Good afternoon, Kimia Haradon, Planning Department staff. So your question was about unit size limitations.
Yes.
Last week, I think, when the unit size limitations were brought up, we compared it to the average unit sizes that we've been seeing in the ADU pipelines, and those averages were higher than the minimum size requirements. However, when I did a query in the list of all permits, I found that 35 of those ADUs in the pipeline will fall below those minimum unit size requirements. And we don't have size information for all of our ADUs in the pipeline, so I would say at least 35 of those ADUs would not be possible because of these size limitations.
And that's out of a little over 100, is that about a third of the units fall underneath the size limitation?
We have 130 units in the pipeline. So
about 30% then, or thereabouts. So that's and it could be higher because you don't have square footage on every single unit.
Correct.
So at least approximately 30% of the units currently in the pipeline fall underneath that, the threshold that Supervisor Peskin is proposing on square footage. And it raises two concerns. I mean, one is for those units, if it would wipe them away. But even if they were grandfathered in, that says to me that a significant portion of the units that are being proposed are below the minimum square footage. And so it's just a concern. I mean, I think we all share the same goal of, trying to produce the largest number. And I understand completely the motivation for setting some sort of floor, but I think that that floor is too high. That's my view.
So if I may, through the chair, Kimia, let me ask you this, which is, last week you made a representation that the average size for studios was 375 square feet, and for one bedroom, 600 square feet, both of them a factor above what was being proposed as a minimum. And now you have new information that contradicts information from last week, but you also have something that is rather curious, if not a little bit troubling, and that is that you represent to us now that in many instances you don't know the actual square footage of the proposed accessory dwelling unit. How, out of your approximate 130 units, for how many do you actually have unit sizes for?
Let me look. So we obviously we know what the size is when we're reviewing it, but we're not collecting the information. I had my intern look at all the permits to get the unit size information, but the permits that kind of left the planning department and was at DBI, it was harder to access, so we couldn't get that information. We have information for 103 of the units out of the 135 units. So that information on the unit size that I provided on averages was the average of those 103 units that we have the information for. And the reason that the additional information I guess I provide today is this is the breakdown of that average. So while the average is higher than the minimum size, when you look at the permits one by one, there are 35 of them that fall under that average or minimum size.
Okay, so what you're saying is that out of the total universe of 135, which is admittedly a small sample size in the grand scheme of things, you have information for 103. And of that information, that the representation that you made last week, which is that the average one bedroom was 600 square feet and the average studio is 375 square feet. So can you break down for us as to that 103 for which you have information? Presumably, we have to have a number of them that are significantly larger than 600 square feet to compensate for your 35 units, or I should say three. Why don't we do this? Out of your 103, how many are one bedrooms?
59.
And how many of those 59 are under 550 square feet?
I don't have that breakdown right now with me, but I can provide you with that.
And so the balance presumably are studios.
We have 23 of ADU studios.
I'm sorry, 23 studios?
Mm-hmm.
So 23 and 59 do not make 103, so the others are really big ADUs that have 2 bedrooms or more?
We have 12 2-bedrooms, we have 8 3-bedrooms, and we have 1 4-bedroom.
All right, let's see. Does that add up, ladies and gentlemen? 60, 83, 85, 95, 103. That adds up. And of the 23, how many are below 350
I don't have that information either right now.
So, look, I think colleagues, and we'll hear from the public on this, which is I'm a little taken aback that a week later you have done more research and figured out that, I don't want to call it 30% because the reality is you don't know about almost 25% because you've got a delta between 135 and 130. But separate and apart from that knowledge gap, I would like to do this based on real information from the city's experience, and insofar as Planning's representative does not have the information on the breakdown of the 59 and the 23, let me ask you this, Councilor Givner. If tomorrow at the full Board of Supervisors we were to make amendments to reduce the minimum unit size threshold, would that be deemed to be a substantive amendment that would have to go back to committee?
Deputy City Attorney John Gibner, no, you could do that at the full board tomorrow, provided we're able to prepare it for you tomorrow. There are a lot of amendments, I think, floating around today that we have not prepared for today or for tomorrow.
This would be really easy. This would be striking out a number and putting in a number.
Right. No, I understand. I'm just there are a whole bunch of really easy things that have to fit together in time for the board to vote on it tomorrow. So, but in response to your question about whether it would require referral back to committee, it would not.
All right. So why don't we endeavor to get that information and then see whether or not there should be some tweaking to the 350 and 550 minimums.
So I agree. It would be good. Once we have that data, we can make a more informed decision. But I'll just reiterate that of the 103 for which we do have square footage, slightly more than 1/3 would be under the current threshold in the legislation. And I think what the breakdown I'm hearing also says to me is that by and large, these are 1 bedroom on average. They're above the threshold, so they're a good size. There's a smaller number of studios on average. They're above the threshold, but a bunch of them aren't. And then there are a smaller number of 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, and up. This sampling of 103 came about without the board putting any kind of restrictions in place other than the citywide minimum square footage, and
which is 220.
Well, it's 220 under the pilot program.
And
that we did.
275 if not.
Or it's a higher amount, a little bit higher. So with that, people just making choices about what makes sense for their home or their apartment building, it seems like we've seen a pretty good spread of some smaller, some larger, but not a trend towards everyone trying to just pack in as many tiny units as possible. And that's why it seemed, from my perspective, if people can make these choices for their homes and their buildings, and I think they're going to make a wide variety of choices. It's sort of like, as I mentioned last time, when the board put a 350 unit cap on micro units in San Francisco outside of affordable housing and student housing, because there were predictions that the entire city would be overrun with micro units. 4 years later, we have not hit that 350 unit cap. So I understand the concern, but I think it has a way of working itself out.
So, and just to add a little context by way of background, this was part and parcel of a negotiation which, to expose how sausage is made, went like this, which was in exchange for liberalizing the caps that Supervisor Wiener had in the District 8 legislation, that brought about the minimum unit sizes in the amendments that I made last Monday.
Okay. So we'll get some data. Do you think you'll have that to us end of day or in the morning?
Yes, I can have that once I get back to the office.
Okay. And if you could even increase the sample size by chasing down the remaining 32 that are at DBI. I was interesting. Supervisor Farrell and I were having this discussion right before the meeting, and of course my hair caught on fire because I was like, Kimia, you're supposed to call the other sponsor too. But separate and apart from that, correct me if I'm wrong, when somebody applies to create an ADU, they start out at DBI with a building permit application. So presumably your application, one's application, is not deemed to be complete until you have a plan that allows the Department of Building Inspection, and subsequently upon referral, the Department of City Planning, to know how large the proposed unit is so that you can see if it complies with building law and planning law. And so it's kind of odd to me that planning has not managed to capture this information upon referral, and that 32 of them are missing. But having said that, I know that you'll get that all to us timely, and we will make policy accordingly.
Okay. Thank you. So if there are no other, thank you very much, Ms. Hadana. If there are no additional comments or questions, we will open item 4 up for public comment, and I'll read public comment cards that we have. Eileen Boken, Kathy DiVincenzi, Shadi Lehrbaum, Sherry Lehrbaum, Greg Scott, Georgia Shudish, and who spelled her name phonetically, and I very much appreciate that. Paul Weber, Corey Smith, Anastasia Yovanopoulos, Rose Hilson, Ralph Gutlin, and Monica McFadden.
I have one question, clarifying question for the amendments that you're making. For the subdivision, I know that the amendments would not allow it in apartment buildings, but I wasn't sure how that control would be for single-family homes, ADUs in single-family homes that are currently owned.
Well, it depends on whether they are RH1 or RH1D. And the answer is, as proposed in the negotiations between myself and Supervisor Farrell. Supervisor Farrell suggested that we not have secondary units in RH1D, and I agreed to that compromise. So relative to RH1, not D, the question was what, Kimia?
Whether or not the ADU would be allowed to be subdivided and sold separately.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DiVincenzi. And I also, let me call I got a few more cards. Sonia Traus, Laura Clark, and Edward Mason. And I'll note for the record that President Breed has appointed Supervisor Farrell as a member of this committee temporarily until the arrival of Supervisor Cohen.
Okay.
You may. Yes,
thank you, Supervisors. I'm Kathy DeVincenzi, and I have a letter I'm submitting, but I would urge you to limit the ADU to the built envelope and not refer anywhere in the legislation to the buildable envelope. And I would respectfully urge a little clarification to the definition of built to make it clear that the built envelope shall include only enclosed portions of a building existing as of July 11, 2016, but shall exclude unenclosed patios or decks. We wouldn't want somebody to say, I built a deck off my first story, and that's the built envelope. And they may try to do that. And definitely, we were shown proposed amendments to Supervisor Farrell and Wiener's measure last Friday that were to possibly include zoning administrator bulletin number 4 areas as amended from time to time. And we understand now that you are not going to proceed, it sounds like, with that amendment. So the situation is fluid. And some of the emails did refer to that because we were shown in writing that that was a proposed amendment. And also, it sounds like you're providing notice now that was not provided in that bulletin. So the major problem now is the zoning administrator's discretion. The measure is still overly broad, as it would allow the zoning administrator to, quote, grant an accessory dwelling unit a complete or partial waiver of the rear yard standards of this code. Now, page 12 of the addendum to the EIR says, quote, the proposed legislation would provide waivers from certain planning code requirements that were not previously available over the past 10 years. So such expanded authority should not be given to the ZA, should delete the word rear yards if we're not going to be expanding out. And so I would urge you to clarify that. I think other than that, the amendment process is proceeding well, but we did the best we could with a fluid situation. We think that Supervisor Peskin's amendment limiting it to filling under the cantilevered rooms should say those that exist as of July 11, 2016 also.
And Ms. DeVincenzi, I don't know if you heard, but I read an amendment that I will offer tomorrow that specifically says, as these spaces exist as of July 11, 2016.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Here's my letter.
Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Shady Lehrbaum. I live in District 8. And I'm here on behalf of the Noe Valley Neighborhood Council. Like every neighborhood in San Francisco, Noe has its own unique thing about it. The beautiful homes and open yards and gardens create a sense of community that San Francisco families love. That's why we choose to live there. Watching the open spaces and gardens sold away and pieced apart for profit is disheartening for those of us that have worked hard to call Noe our home. It is a disservice to our community and to San Francisco to allow this to continue. I ask that the built envelope does not include unenclosed patios or decks. We ask that you do not use Zoning Administrator Bulletin number 4. We ask that no waivers should be granted. Furthermore, the possibility of no notice given to neighbors when an ADU is being built out is criminal. We ask to be notified, and we ask that Noe not be sold away to the highest bidder. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Corey Smith on behalf of the 300 business and individual members of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. Thank you for giving us the opportunity here today. As I'm sure all three of you know, the ADUs were a part of SF-HAC's founding mission, so we are very, very excited to look at what appears to be an upcoming compromise and appreciate everybody working together in the legislative process. A lot of amendments I know thrown around today. In regards to what will be in that final compromise, we want to encourage all of you to come to legislation that will result in the maximum number of units being built, which are critical during our housing shortage. A couple of the items that we did have specific interest on, looks like they were agreed to. In regards to the size limits, we definitely encourage you to look decreasing that or getting rid of it altogether to maximize the number of total units. And then another item, fundamental reform on the permitting and application process. There have been a lot of units in San Francisco that were built illegally, and we want to make sure that we are doing things the right way, and that permitting and application process could help. Thank you so much.
Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Land Use Committee, Rose Hilson. I've looked through the entire planning code, and in Section 102 definitions, there is no set definition for built envelope. And therefore, the revision for built envelope should say, and we urge, or I urge, a bunch of people urge, the committee that the definition of built envelope shall include only enclosed portions of a building existing as of July 11th, 2016, excluding unenclosed patios and decks. And I raise this in particular to lots adjacent to RH1 and in the smaller building lots, because there are going to be unintended consequences otherwise to these RH1 lots, and therefore also the minimum unit size is important. Also, if I can get these papers straight, please remove reference to ZA Bulletin 4 as amended from time to time and put any exemptions within the legislation itself instead of in the bulletin, which is subject to internal departmental changes. Retain the provision for smaller scale buildings when the height is raised, when construction appears in a space outside the building envelope. 311, 312 notices. I think you added that as an amendment. And that's all I have for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Sonia Traus from San Francisco Bay Area Renters Federation. We're the increased capacity arm of the anti-displacement movement. I want to remind everybody that not building displaces people. There are a lot of places we can't build. We can't tear down existing residential to build new residential. That's right. Maybe we shouldn't tear down existing commercial to build new residential. Existing commercial, it's very disruptive to tear that down. Although I still think it's worth it. There's opposition to building new residential on production, distribution, repair, on parking lots, and even, as it turns out, in people's own backyards. People should be able to build to the buildable envelope. It's buildable. I don't know what buildable would mean if you weren't allowed to build to it. And I don't really see any downside at all, besides the fact that some neighbors might have to let their eyes pass over a new thing that looks different and unfriendly to them. We're talking about places that people live, and I don't think it's worth it to save the way a house looks to deny someplace for someone to live. There are real effects to not building. Long commutes, disrupted lives, high rents. These are very bad effects. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, Laura Clark, GROW SF. I'm glad to see that there was a compromise and that this legislation will be moving forward. Of course, I'm a little bit disappointed that, as usual, we treat private backyards like some kind of sacred public park. Remember that these are private backyards, not public open spaces. They are not accessible to the general public. While I understand people really like them, we are in a housing crisis. I don't need to remind you guys of that. But I am happy that you guys have made a compromise. I do want to say that smaller units are the future, and I hope that you sort that out and come up with a square footage that makes sense. And keep all of this in mind, that we need to maximize the total units possible and really try to take that level of urgency into everything you do. And maybe next step would be backyard cottages, although I'm sure that would make some people very unhappy. It is needed, and it's the next step. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Weber. I'm a North Beach resident. I'm a member of Telegraph Hill Dwellers, and I'm a delegate to the Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods. And when I arrived here today with some others, we were planning on listing a number of objections, but with the compromises du jour, if that's the way to talk about them right now, I think there are two or three that I'm either unclear on or you haven't reached a conclusion, so let me just mention those, and I'll try to do it within the 2 minutes, and if not, we can tag team it with some other people. The first issue that we felt was very important was that there be an absolute definition of an envelope, not buildable, but an envelope. And it looks like you've accomplished that by talking about the envelope as built as of a date certain. And that was what we were going to recommend, and I gather that's what you've adopted. Secondly, we had concerns about the open-ended nature of the expansion of the buildable sleeve in a number of ways. Number one, it was to be 12 feet outside the existing sleeve. In addition, there were to be hypothetical expansions under Bulletin 4, and then finally, under Bulletin 4, the ZIA, the zoning administrator, could give waivers. And we had very strong reservations about that, primarily because it looks as if without any legislative input there can be major changes, and finally because there's a pending assembly bill which would require AD applications to be cleared in 90 days, and giving discretion, they're supposed to have this as a matter of right with administrative changes and not discretionary changes, so you wouldn't be able to make those discretionary changes. In any event, if I've understood correctly what you've done, those are still the two minor items we had left. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Georgia Shudish, District 8 resident, Protect Noe's Charm, Noe Neighborhood Council. The collective mid-block open space provides residents with light, air, visual relief, and psychological comfort zone. The mid-block open space, if landscaped, can provide habitat for birds and other animals, enriching the city's biodiversity and well-being. Those are not my words, those are the planning department's words. It's collective open space. It's not just private open space that we're concerned about. I don't think anyone here today has said don't do ADUs. They've said do ADUs in a smart way within the built envelope, whatever that is. I think it's not clear to all of us because of the reference to Zoning Administrative Bulletin number 4 that this is a squishiness involved, and I think that needs to be firmed up. I think if you clarify the definition, as others have said, that would go a long way to making people happy. People don't mind if it's done properly. That's the issue. Do it properly, don't do it willy-nilly. You've built more housing in the city in the last 5 years than you've built previously. The problem is it's not affordable housing. That's the issue. I get the idea that ADUs can be affordable housing because of the size. It's the in-law. Think the typical in-law San Francisco concept and we'll be in good shape. Not 4 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms as these ADUs. I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Anastasia Giovanopoulos, a renter living in District 8. After studying the text of both accessory dwelling unit legislations proposed, I support Supervisor Peskin's ADU legislation number 160252 and his amendments. I'm glad you're coming closer to coming together. And I urge you to reject the provision proposed in Wiener and Farrell's legislation because it's important to keep ADUs within the existing built envelope. Mid-block open space needs to be preserved for our quiet enjoyment. The language employed in the Wiener-Farrell legislation is highly suspect and does the opposite. Buildable envelope is not the same thing as built envelope. Allowing the zoning administrator unlimited discretion to waive rear yard requirements and amending zoning administrator Bulletin 4 from time to time should not be permitted. ADUs should not extend into the rear yard. Now, I feel strongly about the intent of this legislation. ADU studios and 1 bedrooms of a decent size are needed to address the paucity and attrition of rent-controlled housing in San Francisco. Supervisor Peskin's ADU legislation does this, and Weiner-Farrell allows ADUs to be sold as condos. I belong to Noe Neighborhood Council, formerly known as Protect Noe's Charm. We support projects conforming to neighborhood character, size, height, scope, scale, and the San Francisco.
Hello. Hi, my name is Monica McFadden. I'm not only a fourth-generation San Franciscan, but my kids are fifth-generation back there, and also fourth-generation Noe Valleyans. I believe some of the points have been covered fairly well, but I'd like to address a couple of the things that a couple of the speakers have said about our backyards being they're not public spaces and should be built on. That's a bunch of BS. I mean, we can't allow one person's greedy wants to overshadow literally the quality of life of many. I mean, what do we want this city to become? If we allow this bill to be a segue to future growth, building farther back and further up, do we want to see the end of backyard barbecues, water balloon fights, mud pie making, home gardens, and the ray of light for the elderly and housebound? This is not Manhattan. Sorry. I mean, I've seen Mr. Weiner on 24th Street many times, always keeping company with the merchants and people who are trying to build these places, in particular Nutraceutical and your friend Carol Yenny. Trying to build monstrosities. Never have I seen him in a park speaking to the parents or the average constituents. I mean, this is not made to be affordable housing. I mean, do we really want the future generations of this city to be couch potatoes, staring at screens, not able to socialize with their fellow human beings? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ralph Gutlone, and I'm in District 8, and I'm opposed to the ADU, and I'm opposed to it on a personal level because I live in Noe Valley. I've lived there since 1976, and I don't want someone in a little structure in the back of my house and living there and with sewage and with fumes. And I think it's very naive for the supervisors to think that they can enforce a situation of a small little unit not becoming an Airbnb. I don't think it's going to be creating any new housing for people. So I'm opposed to the proposal, and I want the definition of the built envelope should be clarified to include only enclosed portions of a building existing as of July 11, 2016, but exclude unenclosed patios or decks.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Charlie Goss of the San Francisco Apartment Association. We just wanted to thank you for all the work that's gone on over the past 2 weeks on this issue. We appreciate the collaborative nature your offices have had lately and all the work that you and your staffs have done. We feel like this is a good proposal, and we're excited to get it passed and implemented as well, and we're very appreciative. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm Greg Scott. I'm the Vice President of Pacific Heights Residents Association. Prior to that, was the President of Pacific Heights Residents Association for almost 20 years. We are very strongly concerned about the accessory dwelling unit legislation. There's several points I'd like to make. One is we feel it has to be contained in the existing building envelope as of this July. Should not be allowed to go into the rear yard. Should not be allowed to expand the existing building envelope even into what would be buildable. We also feel very strongly that the discretion in the legislation allowing the zoning administrator to waive the rear yard requirements should not be part of the legislation. That leaves too big a loophole to go beyond the existing building envelope, and we're adamantly opposed to that. So PHRA has a long record of being involved in city land use issues. We are probably one of the highest proportion of renter occupied dwellings in Pacific Heights. A lot of people think Pacific Heights is not being as diverse as it is, but we are extremely diverse. We don't object to the diversity. We don't object to the accessory dwelling unit, but we do want them to be maintained within the existing building envelope, and we want them to not have the discretion of the zoning administrator to allow them to go into rear yards. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Edward Mason, a lifelong resident in Noe Valley. The build envelope needs clarification, and the enclosed portions of a building should be as of July 11th and should exclude unenclosed patios or decks and not use zoning 4. My main concerns really are that you've got 40,000 units in the pipeline, and the cumulative effect of this, if there's 100 units already now, they pay absolutely no transportation sustainability fee. As a consequence, we're faced with a new proposition to pay another 0.5% sales tax for transportation to fund growth. If you have 3 and 4 bedrooms, who's going to be occupying that? Are these going to be South Bay workers? Now, also, we've got regionalization, and there's just a new report out by the Bay Area Council. So we ought to put pressure on other cities to do their portion for housing, which evidently is not being done. Consequently, this is the legislation that's being forced upon us now. Growth basically is not funding growth. And I'm concerned about neighborhoods should be notified and counted for good government and in the public interest that we should have. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Brooke Turner with the Coalition for Better Housing. I want to thank each of you, Supervisor Farrell, Supervisor Weiner, and Supervisor Peskin, for all of your work on this issue. Supervisor Peskin, I don't know if it's 10 years ago that we first started talking about this, and lo and behold, with your help, this has come to fruition, so thank you very much. Supervisor Weiner, for all of your work in establishing the original passage of the law. We appreciate that very much. And Supervisor Farrell, thank you for working with the others to make this the best legislation that it can be. We really appreciate it. It's a great effort that's been made on this, and we want to thank you all very much.
Next speaker.
I will be using the overhead for the entire presentation. My name is Eileen Boken, District 4 resident. I do have concerns about even the compromise. Particularly the Weiner-Farrell legislation seems to view rear yards in mid-block open space as wasted space or at best underutilized space. I believe this is short-sighted. Rear yards have value. Environmental, food security, and quality of life value. It is sacred space. In terms of food security, the city has an urban agriculture policy, which has 12 participating city departments. On the NGO side, there are organizations such as the San Francisco Urban Agriculture Alliance and Foodscape, which promote backyard farming throughout the city. In Supervisor Tang's July newsletter, there is an announcement for garden workshop, watering during a drought. In Supervisor Tang's April newsletter, there is an announcement for a presentation, Getting the Most from Your Small Space Food Garden. Supervisor Tang also advocates for the District 4 Front Yard Ambassadors program. One of the goals of the program is to, and I quote, provide permeable surface to take pressure off our combined sewer system and recharge our underground aquifer. The same can be said of rear yards. According to the State Department of Water Resources, the entire landmass of San Francisco sits over a series of aquifers. The Viz Valley, Islas Valley, West Side, South San Francisco Marina, and downtown aquifers. Urban agriculture in rear yards can help with stormwater management and recharge the city's aquifers. Just in case anybody's wondering, this is baby squash from my rear yard garden. Thank you.
Okay, is there any additional public comment on item 4? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Supervisor Farrell.
Thank you, Chair Wiener, and thank you again to Supervisor Peskin. Thanks to everyone who came out in public comment, for those people who've worked on it, the legislation as well. In terms of the comments, I think there's a lot of common ground here, believe it or not. I'm going to read a number of amendments into the record here. I make a motion that we accept them, I guess, as a newly minted member of this committee for items 4 and 5. I'll make that motion, and then we can talk about procedure from here on out. In terms of the backyard, just as a comment, I think this is a balancing act. Ultimately, we want to build more housing here in the city, absolutely. I have 3 little kids. We need backyards as well. So it is a balancing act, and we need to do something that everybody can live with and work around. And I think we've gotten pretty darn close to that with these amendments. So I'm going to read them into the record. So I'll make a motion for these amendments. First of all, on page 5, which essentially I'll read Romanet 2. So it reads right now, an accessory dwelling unit shall be constructed entirely within the built envelope of an existing building or within the built envelope of an existing and authorized auxiliary structure on the same lot as the built envelope in either case existed 3 years prior to the time the application was filed for a building permit to construct the ADU. Now, the last sentence we're going to strike, which states, for purposes of this provision, the built envelope shall include all spaces included in Zoning Administrator Bulletin 4, as amended from time to time, as well as any infilling underneath rear extensions. We're going to replace that sentence with the following, and this is what Supervisor Peskin orally read earlier. For purposes of this provision, the built envelope shall include the open area under cantilevered room or room built on columns, decks, except for decks that encroach on the required rear yard, or decks that are supported by columns or walls other than the building wall to which it is attached and are multi-level or more than 10 feet above grade. And light well infills, provided that the infill will be against a blank neighboring wall at the property line and not visible from any off-site location, as these spaces exist as of July 11th, 2016, and except for any of these spaces that encroach on the required rear yard. In the event that an ADU is built in any of these additional spaces, such construction shall require notice pursuant to Planning Code Section 311 or 312. The second amendment is on page 6, same section, large section C, Romanet 6. We are going to replace the current Romanet 6 with the following. This is regarding the 25% reduction on commercial storefronts. An accessory dwelling unit shall not be permitted in any building in a neighborhood commercial district or in the Chinatown community business or visitor retail districts if it would eliminate or reduce a ground story retail or commercial space. That's number 2. Number 3, we're going to add a Romanet number 7 under the same section C. This is regarding to the minimum size. I think what we're going to do here is insert a number and understand from that we will get additional information from our planning department this afternoon, and we will adjust accordingly tomorrow. But Romanet 7 will be the following. Accessory dwelling units shall have a minimum unit size of 300 square feet for studio units and 500 square feet for one-bedroom units. There will be now forward to page 7. Before new section E, we're going to actually add a new section E. And that is restriction on subdivisions. And it will read the following. Notwithstanding the provisions of Article 9 of the Subdivision Code, a lot with an accessory dwelling unit authorized under the Section 207C4 shall not be subdivided in a manner that would allow for the ADU to be sold or separately financed pursuant to any condominium plan, housing cooperative, or similar form of separate ownership. Provided, however, that this prohibition on separate sale or finance of the ADU shall not apply to a building that within Romanet 1 within 3 years prior to July 11, 2016 was an existing condominium with no rental unit as defined in Section 37.2R of the Admin Code, and 2 has had no evictions pursuant to Section 37.9A8 through 37.9A14 of the Admin Code within 10 years prior to July 11, 2016. That does refer to Ellis Acts. Such requirement for any sale shall be recorded as a notice of special restrictions on the property records or may be included as part of the regulatory agreement.
Maybe we should say and/or. Just a thought.
And/or, fair enough. Deal, Supervisor Peskin. In terms of the next item, page 8, we are going to be including and the seismic relating to the seismic program. What we will do is add a Romanet 3 stating specifically, on lots where an ADU is added in coordination with a building undergoing mandatory seismic retrofitting in compliance with Section 34 of the Building Code or voluntary seismic retrofitting in compliance with the Department of Building Inspection's Administrative Bulletin 094, the building and the new ADU shall maintain an eligibility to enter the condo conversion lottery available on May 31st, 2016, and may only be subdivided if the entire property is selected on the condo conversion lottery. And lastly, believe it or not, we're going to add on page 9, section G, Romanet 6, stating that any regulatory agreement entered into under this section 207C4 shall not preclude a landlord from establishing the initial rental rate pursuant to section 1954.53 of the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act. So, colleagues, those are the amendments.
And that's, I think, sub D. So it's 1954.53 parens, little d, close parens.
We will take that, and if that is wrong, we can amend tomorrow. But fair. So with that, colleagues, that is a motion to include those items, and I will say to the City Attorney.
Supervisor, I think there was one other which was in 307, the sentence that says nothing in this section shall be interpreted as allowing for an existing non-conforming use to be deemed conforming.
My apologies, Supervisor Peskin, that is absolutely correct.
That would be at page starts 8. On page 18 right. And goes to page 19, and the insertion would be on page 19 at line 6.
Correct. So again, to clarify, on page 19, this is section 307 L, or is it I? And the title being exceptions from certain specific code standards through administrative review for accessory dwelling units constructed pursuant to section 207C4 of this code. And we are adding a last sentence saying that nothing in this section shall be interpreted as allowing for an existing non-conforming use to be deemed conforming. So, colleagues, in terms of process here, we are I would like to have these amendments accepted today. We will forward this to and then I'd like to make a motion to forward the underlying item as amended to the full board as a committee report tomorrow. Okay. We are endeavoring, given we have our land use staff at our city attorney's office out today to get all of the amended language and the red line to our clerk's office to send out as a committee report before our board meeting tomorrow. If for some reason that does not happen, we can do these amendments tomorrow at the board meeting itself. But obviously, we would like to do the entire file if possible.
Okay.
And then we can have that discussion. But I think the takeaway here, colleagues, at least from my perspective, again, I want to thank the public comment. I do want to thank my colleague Supervisor Wiener for his longstanding efforts in this regard, and then also, as certainly as you hear the history, Supervisor Peskin as well during his first cycle through this chamber. But thank you to Supervisor Peskin for working together on this item. And I think this is a step in the right direction. And something we can all be proud of and move forward with. So with that, colleagues, I make that motion to make those amendments, and the underlying item is amended to the full board as a committee report for tomorrow's board meeting.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor Farrell. Just two quick things on the language that you read, and thank you for the language regarding the seismic program and the subdivisions. There is, I know this will be sort of drafted in a way that's approved as a form. Right now, the phrase available on May 31st, 2016 is sort of vague because, of course, on May 31st, 2016, there was no lottery available because we're in the middle of a moratorium for another, 6 years or something like that. So I don't think the intent is, I think intent is whatever condo lottery is available to the building. There's currently no lottery available, but as of whatever date, 2022 or something like that, there will be a lottery available. So the way it was read, available on May 31st, 2016, is vague. I'm looking at the city attorney. I don't know if you... I just want to clarify that the intent is that the buildings will be able to participate in whatever lottery is available to them at a given point in time, and not frozen on May 31st, 2016, when the lottery doesn't exist.
Deputy City Attorney John Givner. So instead of May 31st, 2016, are you saying what you want in there is the date of the reinstitution of the lottery, whenever that is?
It's whatever condo lottery is available to that, would otherwise be available to that building on that date. And so the lottery presumably is going to come back to life on 2022. A future Board of Supervisors could, extend that or eliminate the condo lottery entirely. We have no idea what the future holds. But I think the intent here and the goal is to say that, if you're in a 3-unit building and you add under the seismic program and you add the 4th unit, it doesn't remove you from the subdivision process that you otherwise would have had. So whatever the rules are for other buildings are the rules that apply to you, and that's the intent.
So that would be essentially just deleting the words available on May 31st, 2016. Does that capture what you're going for here?
I think so. I don't know if Supervisor Peskin has any feedback on that.
Hold on, I'm looking for it. This is the amendment that says on lots where an ADU is added in coordination with the building undergoing.
Mm-hmm. Right now, the way it shall maintain any eligibility to enter the condo conversion lottery available on May 31st, 2016. Of course, there is no lottery available.
I think, and this is subject to the city attorney's interpretation and was written actually by your staff, Mr. Andrus Powers, but I believe that once the moratorium is rescinded, which was contemplated prior to May 31st of 2016, that they would be eligible, but I'm not an attorney or your staff.
I think the intent is that whatever the lottery rules are or aren't, the lottery may exist or may not exist. It may exist for certain size buildings, but not for other size buildings. We know what the rules are intended to be when the moratorium ends. That could change. We don't know. I suspect the lottery is not going to be expanded, but would only be constricted. And so I think my understanding is that the intent is that whatever the rules are for, if you're going from a 3-unit to a 4-unit, whatever the rules are for other 4-unit buildings are the rules for you in terms of the lottery. And not just as of May 31st, 2016, but as of any moment in time. So I don't know. It seems to me that not having the language available on May 31st, 2016, maybe striking out available on May 31st, 2016 would make sense.
And maybe we should ask Mr. Powers what his intention and meaning was.
I don't know. I'm the supervisor, so that's my intention, desire is that whatever the rules are on a given day and time would be what would apply to these buildings. So nothing more, nothing less.
Colleagues, perhaps I can suggest, understanding the comments here and what I understand to be the intention is, why don't I adjust my motion to delete that date specific, and if we need to clarify additional language tomorrow, we can do so. Would that work?
That sounds great.
Okay.
I mean, the intent here is to allow them to participate in the condo lottery in the future when the condo lottery comes back. That is the intention.
In whatever form it is.
So what I will do then from my motion, to be clear, is delete the words available on May 31, 2016.
So it says to enter the condo lottery and may only be subdivided if the entire property is selected.
Yep, I think that does the trick. Great. And then the one last point I want to make is Thank you for reducing the minimum square footage by 50 feet. I know we'll see what the data is and then make any other appropriate adjustments. I do want to just say that in terms of having one minimum for studios and one for one bedrooms, of course, there's sometimes a fine line between a studio and a one bedroom. And so, for example, I happen to live in a 490 square foot one bedroom, and if under the 300 square foot, 500 square foot, if they were building my exact unit, they would have to basically just knock down a wall and not have it as a one bedroom. And so, query whether there should be one standard or two. At some point, it becomes challenging in that respect, but we'll work that out between now and tomorrow, I guess. Does the unit have sufficient floor-to-ceiling height for you? It has just enough for me. I do not have to hunch when I'm walking in my.
I was waiting for that comment.
I won't make any comments back. So.
There's oceans of room.
Okay, so colleagues, again, would like to make that motion to make these amendments as we've articulated to forward the amended version as a committee report with positive recommendation to the
Can we
board
just, so we match the behavior of this body last week, do like for like and send it without recommendation, so we'll have two pieces of legislation sitting with the same recommendation tomorrow at the full board.
Fair enough.
Okay, so first we'll, on the amendments, we'll take the amendments without objection, and then on the motion to forward to the full board as a committee report without recommendation.
Without objection.
We'll take that without objection. Okay, thank you, everyone. Next, item number 5.
Item number 5. Resolution amending the Public Works Code to place additional limits on the duration of street space occupancy permits and to limit the number of such permits, including permit extensions, that can be issued at the same address during a 3-year period in residential, urban mixed-use, neighborhood commercial districts, and precluding the issuance of such permits at the same address for 2 years after that 3-year period.
Okay, Supervisor Farrell is the author of number 5.
Thank you. So, colleagues, our construction industry is obviously booming in our city, and it's also not a surprise that the sheer amount of this construction work is having significant impacts on the quality of life within our neighborhoods. I do hear complaints from residents every day frustrated by the volume of scarce neighborhood parking spaces that are taken away by construction parking permits. This frustration especially mounts when permitted spaces can sit empty for days at a time, when there are multiple projects on a single block and are being taken up when construction is actually not being done. Given these frustrations in a particular problem site in my district that has been under construction for over a decade, it turns out, I teamed up with DPW and DBI to work on a proposal to reform our permitting system for the issuance of street space occupancy permits. So the proposal in front of us today will do the following. First, would dictate the duration of a street space occupancy permit for building construction operations, including any permit extension, cannot be longer than our current building code allows for completion of work under the original building or site permit. Second, it adds more review before a blanket permit extension and directs the Director of DPW to not grant an extension of a street occupancy permit without first confirming with DBI that there is ongoing work on the site under an action building or site permit. This proposal will give more discretion to the Director of DPW to now treat permit extension requests like a new permit. And under this proposal, the Director may deny the extension or issue new or modified conditions on the permit extension. In addition, the proposal will now give the Director the discretion to revoke any street occupancy permit if he or she feels the public interest or convenience will be served by revoking the permit. Residents under this proposal will have the ability to appeal the decision of the Director to the Board of Permit Appeals. This proposal is intended to help free up limited neighborhood parking spaces and not significantly curtail necessary residential construction, so as the proposal will only apply to residential, urban mixed-use, and neighborhood commercial or named neighborhood commercial transit corridors as defined in the Planning Code. Lastly, the proposal would apply retroactively so that we as a city can proactively address project sites that are causing extreme disturbance and quality of life issues here in San Francisco. I do believe this is actually a very simple and straightforward piece of legislation that will have positive impacts in our neighborhoods and quality of life for our residents. I should say and note to members of the public, I'll mention this to the full board, that this grew out of a parking permit that neighbors had claimed and we found to be true had been constantly reissued for over a decade in my district, where a construction site had been basically dormant for the better part of the prior 9 years. So we want to stop the abuse. We want to allow residential construction to continue as much as possible, but make sure that we maintain quality of life and look out for our residents every single day. So with that, colleagues, I hope to have your support.
Thank you very much. Okay, is there any public comment on item number 5? Seeing none, public comment is closed. And Supervisor Farrell, could I have a motion to forward item 5 to the full board with positive recommendation?
Okay, so moved.
Okay, without objection, that will be the order. Item number 6.
Item number 6. Hearing on bicycle theft and bicycle chop shops, including recent theft statistics, enforcement, best practices in preventative behavior and education, and potential budget and policy needs, and requesting the police department and community organizations to report.
Okay, colleagues, I called for this hearing on frankly, the explosion of bicycle thefts in San Francisco and the proliferation of bike chop shops that we see in our neighborhoods. We know that biking is a key part of our transportation policy in San Francisco. We are working very hard to improve our bike infrastructure, to make it safer to bike. We want more people to bike. It is part of our transit first policy. But we also know that bikes are being stolen left and right in San Francisco. They're being stolen from our streets when they're parked. They're being stolen from people's homes and garages. It is, as you'll hear, there's been a quadrupling of reports of bike theft in the last 5 years. This is it's a deterrent, frankly, to people who are thinking about buying a bike or who are thinking about using their bike more and thus needing to park it in a public space. It is a growing problem, and we need to address it. We also people see and are extremely frustrated by seeing open-air bike chop shops where you see a large number of dismantled bikes on the street. It's very clear what's going on, and people wonder to themselves, why is this not being addressed? Why is the city allowing this to happen? So the hearing today will really focus on what is the scope of this issue, what are we as a city doing to respond to it, and I know you'll hear the police department has been very, very focused on addressing bike theft and has done some terrific work addressing an incredibly large problem. And what should we be doing going forward to try to reduce the amount of bike theft in our city? So we'll be hearing from the San Francisco Police Department, SF Safe, as well as the San Francisco Bike Coalition. And I know we've all been working together and will continue to work together to try to make our city as bikeable as possible, which includes giving people the confidence that they can purchase a bike and regularly use a bike without having it be stolen and continually having to spend money to replace their bike. I want to note that in the about to be adopted budget, the budget that will appear before us tomorrow, I was able to secure an additional $25,000 in the budget for bike theft prevention efforts. We need more resources, but this was a good start. I'm looking forward to the discussion today. And if there are no other comments, actually, Supervisor Peskin, did you want to comment or no? Okay, then I'm going to begin by asking Sergeant Matt Friedman from San Francisco Police Department to come up, and Commander McEachern is also here.
McGeach. Good evening, supervisors, or good afternoon, supervisors. I'm just going to speak for a brief minute. Greg McEachern, the commander of the department's investigations division, and as you mentioned, Matt Friedman is here. Matt is one of our phenomenal resources that we have within the police department that has done a yeoman's job of working on the bike theft problem. He's going to give you just a few-minute presentation on a few things that we're going to address, and then I'll be able to answer any questions. Matt's going to talk a little bit about the statistics of thefts that we've had for the last 4 or 5 years, a little bit about enforcement and what we're doing with the enforcement here in San Francisco, some best practices in prevention and behavior and education for it, and then I'll be able to speak after on some potential policy changes that we're looking at with staffing and so forth, and then be here to answer questions. So with that, I will turn it over to Sergeant Matt Friedman, who will give you a brief presentation.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, supervisors. Thank you very much for having me speak today. Again, my name is Matt Friedman. I'm a sergeant with the San Francisco Police Department. I'm currently assigned to Richmond Station. I started working on bicycle thefts back in 2013 when I noticed a trend that was occurring within the Mission District and some other parts of town too as well. That was just extraordinary. People were coming up to me on the street, calling the station, calling my phone, asking, what can I do? My bike's been ripped off. It's my only means of transportation. It's a problem in this city, and it's the police department is responding in a number of different ways. So from 2013 and 2014, I got together with a number of my colleagues in the department, and we started to undertake an educational campaign to really talk about how you can protect yourself against theft. The numbers here speak for themselves, and these numbers that I'm putting up here are only bike thefts off the street. This doesn't include burglaries, which makes the number go much higher. So this is street level theft. From here, excuse me.
I'm sorry, it's hard to, do you have the handout by chance? Because we can't really read it on the...
You can't read it?
On the screen.
It's blurry?
What?
Is it blurry?
It's just we have a really horrible...
Our screens have been terrible for years.
Yeah, oh, okay. I'm sorry, I don't have a handout, but I can get you some. I'll go over the numbers if you like.
Could you just briefly read those numbers?
Sure. So let's start in 2012. There were 1,704 bicycle theft incidents. 2013, the number climbed to 2,089. 2014, when the bike theft prevention program really was in full swing, it dropped to 1,935. And in 2015, it's back up to 2,324. We've had a number of different arrests associated with that too as well, the highest being in 2014 when the bait bike program was in full swing. We've also had a number of arrests in 2014 for possession of stolen property. That's also when the San Francisco Safe Registry program was in full swing and still is, I believe, and the Bike Index, which all officers use now as a registry program as well, was in full swing. So you can see by the numbers, they're high, and they'll continue on this path as well. Burglaries, again, are not included in this number. So if I go into your garage and steal your bikes, it's coded as burglary. It's not coded as bike theft. So the numbers here are probably much higher when you consider the amount of burglaries that have occurred during that time too as well. So in the past, what we have tried to do is threefold in the department, and that's educate, enforcement, and utilizing the registry and working with our partners like SAFE and the San Francisco Bike Coalition. Many of these partnerships have been very successful. The educational programs that we've undertook have been everything from talks at Google, Twitter, businesses around town, the San Francisco Valencia Cyclery, the Sports Basement, a number of different places where we bring investigators together with bike mechanics, together with the community, and talk about these problems and talk about locking techniques as well as products that we recommend that you use to stop bike theft and to prevent street-level theft. So again, the bike theft prevention program is really all about education, enforcement, and the bike registry program. So I think it's been very successful, and we continue to do that today. We've had partners with the San Francisco POA where they brought 80 heavy-duty U-locks, and we go out and we actually educate people how to use them correctly and what to stay away from. All these bikes, we talk about lock jobs and why these are poor lock jobs and how thieves can get into these bikes pretty quickly. And a lot of people are just amazed when I tell them, hey, this is why this doesn't work, or this is why this doesn't work. Bike theft really is all about time, and the more locks, the more locking techniques, or the better locking techniques that you use will slow a thief down, and he'll just move on to the next bike, one that maybe has a cable lock or just lock the front wheel. So these are examples of what not to do. These are some of the tools of the trade that we've confiscated along the way. So we've confiscated every kind of tool from thieves that you can possibly think of, including guns, power tools. Thieves are very sophisticated and equipped, and they can cut through locks pretty quickly if you're not using the right types of locks. So again, it's education, education, education. Our locking technique that we suggest is called the Sheldon Brown locking technique. And if you look at the diagram at the bottom, people always look at me like I'm crazy when I say, hey, this is the locking technique that I think you should use. This is the approved San Francisco Police Department locking technique. This is your best defense, in my opinion, and a number of professionals around town against bike theft. So we have a very large social media presence. We used to have a bike theft website, but that, I believe, is coming back, hopefully, in the near future. We have a lot of different marketing materials through SAFE and a lot of informational meetings that we go out and talk to the public constantly. And I'm always getting invitations to talk, and everywhere I get invitations to talk, bike theft is a big priority. And we go over this whole presentation. We'll continue to do that as much as possible. We still have some bait bikes that we deploy out in the city. We use that as a way to prevent theft. Bait bikes have been deployed in every district in San Francisco. We'll continue to do that. The way the program was set up specifically is so plainclothes teams in each district can actually check out the equipment and deploy them wherever they need to or wherever there's a hot spot. Some of the stickers other departments use, and you can see at the very top, we've used, is this a bait bike sticker? Thanks to the generous allocation from the San Francisco supervisors, and we made up 25,000 of these stickers and spread them out all over town. We got the media involved. We put out our bait bikes, and in 2014, I like to think that because of all our efforts, you saw a dip in theft on street-level theft. That's really it. So if you have any questions from a police perspective, I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, I have just some questions. So the quintuple or quadrupling of bike theft incidents from 2010 to 2015, which is 582 thefts in 2010, up to 2,324 bike thefts in 2015. That just includes from the street, not from people's homes or cars.
That's correct. That is bicycles that are reported stolen on the street.
And do we have data for non-street thefts?
The unfortunate thing is that that data would be captured under burglaries, and inside burglaries, it would be items stolen during the burglary, and we're not able to parcel it out to know how many bikes were actually stolen from the burglaries because the title of the report is not theft of a bicycle, it's an actual burglary.
Right, and you would have to go through an itemization. Okay, so it's not coded in that way.
Correct. It's not coded in that manner.
And do you have, so we don't have the data, but just, I hear all the time that people are having their bikes stolen from their garages, for example, or it could be that they have their bike in their backyard or their side yard and they're having it stolen from there. Do you have a sense that has spiked as well?
Absolutely. When you look at those numbers, we've obviously been challenged with property crimes in San Francisco. It's been a hot topic for a long time. And those are just the reported numbers that you have in front of you. And anecdotally, we know that the numbers are generally much greater than what's reported right there, whether it's in a backyard, whether it's tied to a post in front of the Westfield Mall, or any other location that's accessible to the public.
Okay. So, okay. And just in terms of, you talked about some strategies that people can use to be safe. I know the department is very focused on it, but just on the data we have in terms of bikes being stolen from the street, I mean, it's a huge increase. And I know over the same period of time, we've seen a significant increase in auto break-ins and auto thefts and other kinds of property crimes. Do you think that this increase, is this following the same trajectory? Do you see it as being part of that problem or having different factors that are driving what's really just an explosion?
I think that it's following the same pattern as the other property crime rise that we're seeing. San Francisco is a transit, public transit using bicycles, using other means besides vehicles, and with the increase in the education about using bicycles, there's a lot more that are on the street, and it gives more of an opportunity for these thieves to gain access to them. We have done a few things to address it, and we're looking at moving forward and addressing those. A lot of the complaints we get are from the district station captains where have certain locations. I know that a lot of them affect where you are, where we will get email or other information about locations where we've located what someone seems to be is a bike chop shop, whether it's on the street or someone's garage, an area. Sometimes it's encampments that have them stacked up. And so our focus is to address those concerns as immediate as we can with the staffing that we have. But we're looking to come up with a more formalized response to it with dedicated personnel. Matt did, as I said, a wonderful job when he was there, and it's something that the public cries out about a lot of times, and we need to address that. One of the initiatives that the mayor has talked about, the neighborhood crime unit, and while we don't want to take away resources from the district stations, and we know that there are things that we can do as a department to help those district station captains when these problems arise, and we think that this issue that might crop up in a neighborhood would be something that the neighborhood crime unit could help the district station captains address on an immediate level so that they can get a response right away to abate it and then take some enforcement when it's appropriate.
And in terms of who right now, who in the department is assigned to focus on bike thefts?
So right now, the specific assignment is at the discretion of the district station captain. So when they have concerns that arise within their district, it's the responsibility of the on-duty officers to respond to try and address it. That's one of the issues that we're looking at, is that the most appropriate response to get what the community needs. And that's where we're looking now with our current staffing levels and moving forward about what's a best practice for the department and whether or not we as an organization need to look at a more dedicated specific unit to it than just at the district station level. So right now it lies with the district station, but...
Right, so Sergeant Freeman was basically not replaced in terms of having a citywide
Correct.
Coordinator. And was that why was that decision made?
That was a staffing need at the time. But as the chief is looking at the review of the department from top to bottom and what is and isn't working, that's part of it. And we're realizing that this is a community concern that the department needs to be more focused on as well.
Yeah, and I understand. I mean, the department clearly has had a lot of staffing challenges, which we're trying to gradually fix. But although clearly station by station, or in terms of neighborhood policing, there's a significant role there in terms of preventing and addressing bike theft, I do want to strongly encourage the department to reestablish a citywide coordinator, because we know it is a citywide problem. It crosses district lines. To me, it should be addressed at that level. And it really does. It undermines. The level of bike theft we're seeing really undermines our transportation goals. We all work so hard to try to get the infrastructure in place, get the bike parking in place, encourage people to bike, try to improve safety, push Vision Zero forward. And if people don't have confidence that they can, park and lock up their bike somewhere to get a cup of coffee or go shopping or whatever, it undermines everything we're trying to do. So I do want to just encourage the department to reinstate that position.
I concur with you, and I will.
Okay, and great. If we could just say maybe updated on that, that would be terrific.
Absolutely.
Do you sense that you're making in terms of some of the more organized theft rings that we're seeing? Do you sense that we're making progress in trying to sort of drain the swamp?
I'll let Matt address that.
Well, again, I think it's up to the districts, the district stations now to address the problems as they come up. So it's usually up to plainclothes teams in the districts to go out and deal with that, whether it's a call for service, where officers go out and deal with that. I have a lot of knowledge about some of these theft rings because I had been working on it for a while. I like to think that the plainclothes teams in every district have knowledge of theft rings that happen in their district, and they'll continue to work on it. Going back to before what you said, Supervisor, about some of the reasons that the explosion in theft is occurring. It's obviously the population in San Francisco is turning to biking as an everyday form of transportation. And thanks to the good work of the San Francisco Bike Coalition, more and more people than ever before are biking in the city. And so because of that, you're seeing more theft around this. Bikes get more expensive. People are investing in it as a daily need. And because of that, they're getting ripped off and they're getting sold. They're making their way out to flea markets outside the city and then back online. It's a very kind of curvy path that these bikes are taking, and it definitely needs to be stopped. So.
But just like going forward, hopefully we'll reinstate this citywide coordination position. But what kinds of strategies can we pursue in the future to reduce it? Because I understand we are growing and there are more bikes, and so there's going to be if you have twice the number of bikes, you're probably going to have more theft. But a quadrupling is really significant. And
Sure.
So what can we do going forward, other than, of course, everyone doing everything we can as residents to protect bikes and other property, but what can the city do in terms of maybe new or additional strategies?
Well, I think as we move forward and staffing allows within the San Francisco Police Department, I'd like to see more cops on bikes. I'd like to see, as not only a community policing model, but as a theft deterrent, we built this amazing infrastructure here in San Francisco regarding biking, and we're continuing to do that. Have cops out investigating these chop shops, have cops riding the bike lanes, kicking out bikes or kicking out cars from bike lanes, having an overall comprehensive plan to deal with the safety of bike riders in the city. And that's what I feel would put us forward or make progress on the theft-related issue. It's a big problem, the chop shops. They'll continue to be a problem. Right now, I've written an operational plan to go out and start dealing with some of these chop shops in the Mission District and in the Southern District. I'd like to think that's going to be happening soon. Lieutenant Mike Nevin, who's the homeless liaison, I've been working with him to try and get units out and start to deal with these chop shops that are specialized in homeless-related services, to move some of these homeless folks off the street, and then to deal with some of the bike frames, the bike parts, and everything else that's left behind in these chop shops.
Yeah, right now, how is the department dealing with the chop shops? I mean, we all want to help folks who are living on the street and do everything we can, but the specific issue of you see just all of these dismantled bikes in one location. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's frustrating to people when they see
Absolutely.
that.
It's frustrating to us too.
Yeah. So how is the city dealing with that specifically?
Well, I know officers in every district probably have their own strategy or model, but as far as I know, officers go out to these places probably on a daily basis, and they'll run potential suspects for warrants. They'll try and look at serial numbers utilizing the SAFE bike registry as well as the bike index registry to see if anything is reported stolen. The problem has always been a lot of people don't report these bikes stolen, and so when they are stolen, there's no way for us to match these back to their owner. So it's just a guy with a lot of bike parts and bikes sitting on the sidewalk or sitting in an encampment. So it's been an issue to deal with, but I think we're getting creative in that sense. Number one, we're trying to move homeless encampments off the street. Number two, we're trying to identify bike frames and bike parts that we can say, well, that's definitely stolen. Here's why. and confiscate it, get it back to its owner. But again, also, Prop 47 had an issue with this because it changed the threshold of what we can charge on a felony versus a misdemeanor. A lot of the stuff that we encounter out on the street is less than $9.50, so it's a citation. Here you go, thank you, we'll take the bike frame and walk away. That doesn't mean we're going to confiscate the 50 million parts that are left behind, as well as the other frames that we can't identify the owner.
So right now, in terms of actually taking the frame, it requires that there be a serial or something that you can link as a stolen?
I think most police officers will do that. My experience, though, I know some of the people that I work with, if there's a serial number scratched off the frame, that's an automatic confiscation. That's a misdemeanor. If we can articulate correctly in police reports why we think this is stolen and give us an opportunity to try and investigate who the owner is, we will confiscate then too as well. Obviously, if we identify the rightful owner, we confiscate then too as well.
But what if it's you have one person there with dismantled bikes? It looks like it's probably 4, 5, 6 bikes. One person, you can't really tell because of the dismantling who they belong to. How do you respond to that? Where it's just so crystal clear. Most people don't walk around with 6 bikes, dismantled.
It's crystal clear to us, but it might not be the law. So it's very hard to take property from one person and say, hey, we're taking this because we think it's stolen. We need some kind of proof to verify that it's stolen.
So the law as it stands today, you're saying, does not allow you to really address that kind of situation, even if it's one person with 4, 5, 6 dismantled bikes. Okay, I think a lot of people would be surprised to learn that, but that's very informative, so thank you. And thank you for your work. People think very highly of you, and I think people were really sad when you were reassigned, but the fact that you're here shows that obviously it's something you personally are passionate about, and so I know we're all very appreciative of that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. No, we're doing presentations. And you're the chair, so you don't have to buzz in to speak. Were you wanting to speak, Madam Chair?
I was going to speak, but I was asking if we've taken public comment.
Yeah,
let's go ahead and take public comment, and I'll just save my stuff for later.
Okay, well, we have to hear from SF Safe, from the Bike Coalition first.
Continue.
So San Francisco Safe, and then the Bike Coalition.
Thank you for having us today, and thank you for bringing this topic up. It's so important. My name is Sarah Burton, and I'm the Executive Director of San Francisco Safe, and we run the Safe Bikes Registry and Bike Theft Prevention Program. And I know that we mentioned it a couple of times what the registry is, but just to be a little bit clearer, it's an opportunity for bike owners to register their bikes, to put in the serial number, a description, possible photographs and receipts, as a way for them to, as a reminder for them to make sure that they have a serial number, because that is how they can prove that it is their property. Many owners don't realize that they have to have that serial number to be able to prove that it is their bike. So it's able to put it in a registry that the San Francisco Police Department can then access and determine whether or not it's stolen. Every bike that's registered does get a tag, and we hope that that's also a little bit of a prevention method. If someone knows that it's registered and the police department has access to that serial number and then be able to give it back to their owners, that someone might not target that bike quite as much. And the second part to the Safe Bikes program is education. We provide hundreds of prevention education presentations, and those are, you mentioned Twitter and Google, but we also go to many of the schools, so University of San Francisco, San Francisco State, Holt Business School, and then DocuSign, Airbnb, and Adobe. So we go to the very large employers that have a huge amount of bike commuters and teach them how to lock their bikes appropriately and how to register their bikes and making sure that they are parking their bikes in right places and being safe about that. And then because we know that is a huge issue, that burglary of bikes from garages and from homes is becoming increasingly common. We are making sure that it is a part of all of our neighborhood watch programs, as well as all of our residential security surveys, how to make sure that their bikes are locked properly when even at home or in a garage, because many people don't even think about that. In fact, just last week, we had a volunteer of San Francisco Safe and the Bike Coalition. His bike was stolen from his garage, but he had had it properly locked. The thief apparently gave up on it and just abandoned it on the street. A citizen brought it to a bike shop. The bike shop saw the safe tag, called us, and within 3 hours, he got his bike back. So it's not just a partnership with the San Francisco Police Department, but bicycle shops and community members are starting to realize that they also have an opportunity to be able to help be those people to get suspicious bikes or bikes that they suspect are stolen back to their owners. So it's a huge community effort, and it helps take a little bit of pressure off the police department, we hope. And one of the things that I think, really need to be able to bring this to a larger scale or to have faster recovery and returning of bikes is ways to make sure that our registry can communicate better with the police department. Right now, they have to wait till they can call us. We're a 10 to 6 organization. But we know that bikes are stolen on weekends in the middle of the night, and we want to make sure that we're able to give people that instantaneous response, which currently we're not up to speed with. But that's just a brief overview of Safe Bikes, if you have any questions.
No? Colleagues, any questions? Thank you. Great, thank you. Now our final presentation will be from Brian Wiedemeyer from the San Francisco Bike Coalition.
Thank you. Good afternoon, supervisors, and thank you, Supervisor Wiener, for calling this hearing on this very important topic. As we've heard from San Francisco Police Department, bike theft is a vexing and growing problem here in our city, and statistics only tell part of the story. We know that the time and effort that goes into reporting theft can often deter folks from filing a police report. So statistics and unreported thefts only tell part of the story. Addressing bike theft, as was mentioned, is an important thing to do in this city, especially with our goals of increasing bicycle mode share. We know that having a bike stolen, or the fear of having it stolen, prevents more people from riding. We conducted our biannual member survey this year, and more secure bike parking and less fear of bike theft were among the most popular factors that deter more people from riding or from biking more. And anecdotally, I hear it time and again that somebody has been the victim of bike theft and it has prevented them from continuing to ride in the city. Bicycle theft is a property crime, but I would encourage the supervisors to think as well about the social and economic impact of bike theft in San Francisco. We know that for many low-income residents of our city, the bicycle is an affordable transportation choice and an economic lifeline that allows them to work jobs during hours or locations that may be inconvenient to public transportation or walking. When these individuals become victims of bike theft, it threatens their ability to remain in the city and maintain their livelihood. So I want to talk a little bit about prevention and then enforcement. Looking at prevention, we know Officer Friedman talked a little bit, Sergeant Friedman talked a little bit about prevention. It is the most effective and least costly way to combat bike theft in San Francisco. And while we partner with SF Safe and SFPD and on our own continue to teach thousands of people every year in free adult bicycle education workshops how to properly lock their bikes, that doesn't make a lot of difference if we don't have places to securely lock them. And an amendment of the SF Planning Code in 2013 mandated new standards for secure indoor bike parking in new residential and commercial constructions. But these standards don't apply to existing residential and commercial structures. Certainly, those folks, we were talking about small units earlier in this committee meeting, smaller units and in rent-controlled buildings and in SROs really struggle to find the adequate storage space to secure bikes, making biking a difficult choice for those folks. In addition, existing commercial building managers are often reluctant to expand indoor secure bike parking. One thing I do want to point out is that city-owned parking garages are also required to provide more secure attended bike parking under the 2013 planning code change as part of that ordinance. Many are still out of compliance. The Fifth and Mission garage, for example, is located, as Sergeant Freeman said, in a high bike theft area near Westfield Center Mall. Bike thefts occur around that area more than anywhere else in the city, and the effort to get secure attended bike parking in that parking garage has been delayed, and the garage is still out of compliance as a result. Looking at sidewalk racks, galvanized steel street racks, the city's municipal bike parking option, SFMTA has made recent strides to expedite the siting and installation of those racks, but it could be working faster. That includes bike parking corrals and sidewalk racks. We would argue for more proactive outreach to commercial corridors within San Francisco to increase the number of requests that are received. That's how those racks are sited. I really do want to thank, switching to enforcement for the second half here, the SFPD officers present, in particular Sergeant Friedman, who's been such a champion and worked so tirelessly to address the issue of bike theft in our city. We commend the Bait Bike program, for example, as a great tool to deterring theft. And as well to our partners at SF Safe. The Registry and Safe Bikes program that they run is the best way San Franciscans can ensure that if their bike is stolen and recovered, SFPD can reunite them. We would always argue for more and better funding of SF Safe to address that resource concern that was brought up earlier about the availability of staff to respond and coordinate. I want to say that finally, chop shops attract attention, of course, because of their visibility on the streets. But they are, however, only the most visible symptom of this problem. We know that in many cases, bike theft is a multi-jurisdictional issue, with professional theft rings stealing bicycles in San Francisco, and then they end up for sale online or at flea markets in San Jose, Alameda County, the North Bay as well. This is a huge challenge to effective enforcement for our under-resourced police staff. We believe at the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition that real solutions to bike theft will focus on prevention, registration, and smart and innovative enforcement solution. Addressing these challenges will only lead to more people riding on our streets and help the city meet its goals of increasing biking and decreasing congestion on our streets. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much.
Questions?
No. Okay. So, Madam Chair, if we may now move to public comment. Please. I have a few public comment cards. Ada Berkowitz, Dan Cote, Louise Murphy, Randall Jacobs, Ruskin Landreth, and Aaron Starr.
Hi, my name is Aida Berkowitz. I live in the South of Market area, and I've had 5 bicycles stolen in the last 6 or 7 years, 2 within the last 6 months. I can afford to replace my bicycles, but there are a lot of people in the city who cannot. I did everything the police department said. I bought the best locks. I did everything that I was supposed to do. I locked it to a rack tight. Everything that I did was right, and I still got 2 bicycles stolen in the last 6 months. And with all due respect to the San Francisco Police Department, I don't think they're doing enough. At one time, I understand there was a bicycle theft unit, and that was what the bait bikes are all about. They're not doing that anymore. Sergeant Friedman is the only one, and he's assigned to other things. When my last bike was stolen outside of Westfield Mall, and I had no idea it was a high theft area or would not have parked there, there was a security camera right over the bike rack. I called the police department, told them about it. I waited for an hour and a half. No one showed up. I couldn't wait any longer. The only mechanism that I was aware of, or that anybody else is aware of, is to file a police report online. And by that time, your bike is God knows where. I also registered my bike with Bike Safe. I've done everything right, and still in the last 6 months, I had 2 bicycles stolen. And they're not inexpensive bicycles. In the case of car theft, for example, we have a whole system arranged around the country for the theft of automobiles. I think it behooves us to start thinking about that for bicycles. And I would really urge the supervisors to create a bicycle theft unit within the San Francisco Police Department and use that as a model for maybe something around the country where we start looking at bicycle theft and more than just a theft of somebody's toy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, I'm Dan Cody. Thank you for calling this meeting, Supervisor Wiener. Thank you, Officer Friedman, for your work on this. I've been biking for some years in the city. Very careful about the way I lock my bike. Yesterday, my wheel was taken from the grocery store where there was a a guard standing like 2 feet away. The person had sophisticated tools. There's no correct way that you can unlock a bike in the city. They can cut right through that in seconds, and they're on another bike off to the chop shop. Nobody goes, there's too much going on. They can't go bust up the chop shop. My business is disrupted. I had to change my lifestyle. You can't drive a car in this town either unless you want all the windows broken every time you park. I hope that there's some action. It looks like you're doing some good work on housing to help. Some of the root cause, I think, is people on the streets forced to live in encampments for whatever reason. They seem to be growing. And I've noticed since that's been happening, there's a lot more brazen daytime thefts, a lot more breaking into buildings, condo buildings getting broken into, and the bike room in there getting hit for all the bikes. It's just, I haven't seen anything like this. It's the last 6 months, actually. But thank you for calling attention to this, and thank you for your work.
Thank you very much. I have a few more cards I'll call as well. Randall Dietel, Robin Levitt, Joel Bartel, and Davi Ottenheimer. And, and Jefferson.
Good afternoon, Supervisor, and thanks for allowing me to speak here today. My name is Louise Murphy. I'm all the way from Ireland, but we feel as a company that we have the solution to bike theft. We've done a lot of research all over Europe and all over the States. We realise that bike theft is an absolutely huge problem. 1 in 4 people that have their bikes stolen actually discontinue cycling. Your bike theft figures are actually quite low. We have 461 bikes stolen weekly in Ireland in a population of 4.5 million. So your bike theft figures are low. But what we feel is that there needs to be better infrastructure, but there also needs to be better bicycle parking. And we've created individual locker system that's cloud-based. And it can be placed for public usage on a very small footprint, 12 individual lockers as part of one unit. And people can park their bikes through an app or online very safely and securely. And then there's a complete record of who has parked their bike where, and when they vacated the locker, and then it's available for the next person. I think the issue with the systems that are on the market at the moment is there are bike lockers out there. They've been out for years and years. There's been nothing new for the last 25 years. It's simply an access code, or it's a key system. So that's site-specific and it's user-specific. But with Cyclock, once they're placed all over a city, a cyclist can move seamlessly through the city from Cyclock to Cyclock, parking at their destination and parking not only their bike but their belongings too. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Starr. I'm a resident of District 8, and I work for the Planning Department. These comments are my own as a private citizen. I'm also not being paid while I'm making these comments. I've lived in San Francisco for 20 years, and I've biked pretty much since I've moved here. This spring, I know of 3 bikes that were stolen within a week. One was my coworker's bike, stolen from a bike cage at work where it was locked. The second was my bike, also locked and stolen from the bike cage. The third was my friend, stolen as he was getting coffee at Starbucks at Fox Plaza. The bike was locked with a U-lock and stolen in broad daylight on Market Street, a major city street. When I filed the police report, the officers were extremely polite, professional, and they took the theft very seriously. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from another police officer letting me know that they found my bike. This officer was also very polite and professional. Overall, it left me with a good impression of SFPD. So thank you, SFPD, for their professionalism and finding my bike. I really appreciate it. Why my bike and my friend's bike were stolen in the first place is something that the city needs to work on. My friend who locked his bike up in front of Starbucks had the reasonable expectation that his bike would be there when he returned. My coworker and I had the reasonable expectation that if we locked our bikes in the cage at work, the bikes would be there when we got off work. I don't know what the solution is to bike theft in SF. I'll leave that to the professionals, but it is certainly a problem. These aren't just toys that we ride for recreation. All 3 of us rely on our bikes as the primary mode of transportation. One thing that I would like to see is clear commitment from the Department of Real Estate to upgrade all city bike cages so that they are up to current standards. After my bike was stolen, some improvements were made to the bike cage at 1650 Mission, but it's still seriously lacking. Many employees in our building don't feel safe locking their bikes in the bike cage. City departments should be a showcase for well-designed and secured accommodating bike cages. Thank you.
And is that in the basement, in the garage?
No, it's actually the ground floor garage that is permeable to everyone on the street.
Are there cameras around?
There are cameras, and they did record someone stealing it twice.
Was it a familiar person, or was it a civilian on the street?
You know, no one said, and they didn't allow me to view the footage, so I don't know.
So we haven't determined whether it was one of your coworkers or not yet?
I'm sorry?
It was a joke. Never mind.
It wasn't a coworker, no.
So it was someone outside of the city family, outside of the Department of Planning.
Yes, someone had been casing the building, and they came back and forth several times. They cut a hole in the chain link fence, and they opened the door that way. And then Real Estate Division didn't notify employees that someone had done that, so we all locked our bikes there. And then 2 days later, he did the same thing, opened it up, and stole my bike.
So question, has the Real Estate Department changed their policy whenever there's a compromise and say like the fence to notify people, hey, want to bring to your attention that there's...
I don't know if they've changed their policy. We've asked for several improvements to the bike cage. They've made some, but they haven't given us an update on them. And when I asked, like...
Who determines the improvements to the bike cage?
I believe the building manager is the one that makes the ultimate decision on that.
Who's the building manager?
I'd rather not call someone else.
That's okay, I'll figure it out.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony.
You're welcome.
Next speaker, please.
Hello, supervisors and everyone else here. My name is Ruskin Landreth, and I want to start with this kind of like a contrast with where we are here in Europe and our bike infrastructure. To start off, all of our bikes, we're going to always have to spend more money on them because we have to jump potholes, we have to move into fast traffic because of double parked cars. So we're always going to have more expensive bikes to get stolen. As we talked about, enforcement's a really hard deal. With Prop 47, we have 3 exclusions where there can be actual enforcement on these misdemeanor cases. Property theft over $950, individuals that have violent histories and sexual offenses. And as we look at this, as our police officers roll up onto these chop shops, we need to really call them what they are. They're places of business, and they're unlicensed business places. And in my mind, looking at the Board of Equalization and other business laws, that's the real way that we can approach this. These are unpermitted places of business. If we're to enforce some freely available permit for public bike operations for over 3 bikes or something like that, then we potentially have our enforcement strong arm. Beyond that, all I see is abatement. A bike chop shop will be on a corner here. There's a call. Police officers come. It moves. Nothing's ever going to get done with that. We're never going to get full registration. Any U-lock can be broken in 30 seconds or a minute or less with the right tools. So we really need the enforcement, and I think that's really where this discussion should go. Thank you, everyone.
Hi there. My name is Joel Bartel. Today's my day off, and just want to say thanks to Councilor Wiener for holding the hearing today. It's a really important issue. I work at a bike shop in town called Pedal Revolution. It's a nonprofit shop that also does social service work. And the whole theft situation, another angle on the problem is it really makes it hard for us to do our business. Having any kind of small business in San Francisco is very challenging. Bike shop business is very challenging. And the severe theft situation really makes it even harder for us. So anything that can be done would be great. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thanks for touching on so many of the important points. It's really crucial to deal with this to really make the city great for everyone.
Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Davi Ottenheimer. I'm a security professional, so I've been researching security for my entire career, over 20 years, but I had my first bike stolen in 1989 and have been sort of focused on it since then as well. I think I'd go start with my recommendations. The first I feel like is we don't treat bikes the way we should when we park them. I really feel like we need to, if you look at Chicago, for example, they built a building recently where you can ride your bike into the building and then park it at your desk and lock it yourself to your desk where you're working, which I think is a whole revolutionary way of thinking about parking for these vehicles. I think if we're going to do a valet attendant style, then it really needs to be somebody who's going to pay attention to the bikes. If you park in a garage around town, you might find that they'll just say, bikes are over there, but we'll watch the cars because they have real value. And obviously there is a higher asset value for cars. But another recommendation I find is that we need dedicated staff. I mean, I really appreciate what SFPD is doing. It's a different way of thinking about risk when you think about bike theft. You have to understand that components make the bike as much as the frame itself, and you need to look at those things very differently. You need to know when somebody is what we call hinky. If you see somebody riding a small girl's bike and they're a large male, it might just set you off right away that they're either stealing bikes or in process of having already stolen one. I see this on cameras that I monitor myself. I'll give you a few examples of what I've seen. We see racks being loosened and stolen around the Mission, and we report those and they get ignored. So racks are just disappearing, the entire racks. Bike shops are getting their windows smashed, and we get a clear view of the person stealing it. It turns out to be a young male in Marin who's doing it for fun as a pastime, who's just giving them away. We find offices have their garages broken into. I watched 3-hour theft the other night from 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. I watched 2 individuals spend 3 hours cutting fences and using slightly larger tools over time. They ended up with a 3-foot-long wrench that they were applying, and as pedestrians walked by, they did nothing. So I really think we have to rethink how we investigate and how we approach parking. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Robin Levitt here. I'm a 25-year resident of San Francisco. I've been biking all that time here. I have to say that used to be, bike theft has always been a problem here. But in the past few years, it's become an epidemic. And used to be you'd use common sense, you'd lock your bike properly, you wouldn't have any problems. It doesn't work anymore. And I want to thank the police for everything they've done, but it's, as everybody said here, it is an epidemic. I'm going to just share some of my experiences with bike theft. I work in the Hearst building at 3rd and Market Street. There's the Hearst garage. I bought a new seat for my bike. It was a very expensive seat. And within 2 days, that seat was stolen, even though it was locked to the bike. There were video cameras. There are video cameras in the garage. They saw the person do it. I called the police. Unfortunately, the police didn't take a report. I offered to show them the video. They didn't bother seeing the video. About a year and a half ago, my garage in Hayes Valley was broken into. I have about 8 bikes in that garage. 4 of those bikes were stolen. Fortunately, I heard the noise, and at 2 o'clock in the morning went downstairs and saw the car driving off, presumably with those bikes. One of those bikes was locked in the garage. They cut the lock and stole that bike. Then, let's see, what else? Then, after Opera in the ballpark last year, I and a friend were riding home from Opera in the ballpark on Division Street, which is Chop Shop Central. We at Brian and
Finish your last sentence.
Oh, well, it doesn't make any sense because it's a whole story about we caught somebody in the act of stealing bike parts. We followed him to the chop shop. We called the police. The police showed up, but they wouldn't do anything, even though we had seen this person drop the parts off at a chop shop. And I told the police where to go. They weren't interested. So I'm just saying that all these things add up to, we need more enforcement, we need better bike racks, and so on and so forth. And I'd be happy to share some more experiences with you. But it's an epidemic.
Perfect. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Randall Deedle. I'm a bike messenger in San Francisco, and over the
past 6 months, I've actually recovered 3 stolen bikes as I saw them in the city. And I recovered them because I was able to recognize them based on the very public reporting and visibility of bikeindex.org. And while I appreciate what Safe Bikes does for everything, I hope that there's a way that you can get your stolen bikes visible to the public. And as an aside, on my way here, I saw one of those thieves that I confronted and recovered a bike from riding a bike down McAllister Street. So he's still out there doing his thing. We need to empower the police to eliminate these chop shops because it takes away a currency that people on the street use to perpetuate their lives of homelessness. And when they do that, they put, as a San Francisco Bike Coalition mentioned, they put others at risk of homelessness by taking away their transportation to get to their job. The SFPD needs to really start taking some of this camera footage and putting it together and start tracking these individuals, because it's the same people who are going into garages, it's the same people who are using portable power tools to cut a U-lock in 10 seconds to steal a bike. And I particularly want to draw attention to the location of one of these chop shops. It's, I think it's called Islas Creek Park. Mm-hmm. It's 3rd and Cesar Chavez. That entire area is occupied by temporary structures that are larger than my studio apartment. And the last bike that I recovered, the individual who I recovered it from, he's a well-meaning street person, and he told me that he bought it from this individual who has 50 bikes in his spot right there at, Islas Creek.
Can you finish what you were saying?
So, there's these we see these little chop shops on Folsom Street and stuff where, cheap bikes are getting chopped up and stuff. But there are these stronger, more dangerous areas that have been in existence for a longer amount of time that are being ignored and that need to be really addressed.
Where exactly was the big one that you just mentioned?
Islas Creek.
Islas Creek Park. It's
Cesar Chavez.
Cesar Chavez, where it kind of dead ends. There's an inlet, a channel.
Yeah.
And so there's 2 areas actually. On the north side of the channel, there's some sort of promenade, or I'm not sure what it is. There's some structure there a little bit, but it is completely encamped. And then there's actually a gate that some individuals have made that blocks access to underneath 280 at the end of that. And I believe that's where there's probably a large amount of stolen property. And it goes beyond just bikes. If you go up and down Folsom, these people don't just have bikes that they're chopping up. They have parts of cars, they have parts of motorcycle panniers, they have motorcycle helmets, bicycle helmets, anything that's not secured with a lock, and anything that is secured with a lock, if the person has the right tools, they're out there taking it. And we need to give San Francisco Police Department the resources and the tools to make this stop.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Jefferson McCarley. Thank you, Supervisor Wiener and Sergeant Freeman, for all the work that you've done over the years. Thank you for getting this conversation going once again. I wanted to come and share, the perspective of a bike shop manager, Pedal Revolution. I'm glad that you're here today. I have the opportunity to hear a lot of stolen bike stories, because when your bike is stolen, the first place you go is to the bike shop to buy another bike. And usually customers tell me, I'm here because my bike was just stolen. And I always ask them, how was it stolen? 80% of the time, it was stolen from a safe place. So garage, a bike cage at work. So these numbers that we were just looking at before from the police department, they're really, really low. This is kind of, the other 20% is just people using usually a crappy low quality U-lock or a cable lock, or locking their bike up improperly. This is maybe a little bold or a little outrageous, but if I were in charge, I would ban crappy, cheap locks and make them I feel like it's unethical for bike shops to sell low-quality locks. People walk in buying a really cheap lock. They think it's going to protect their bike, and then someone comes along with a hammer, busts it open, and steals their bike and perpetuates the problem. The other thing is that Craigslist, there's been some pressure on Craigslist to ask people to load up their serial number when they're selling stolen bicycles. And I don't think that it's gotten much traction, but any bike sold on Craigslist that doesn't have a serial number should have a warning. Warning, the owner of this bike did not put the serial number in. Be advised, you may be buying a stolen bike. I don't know if there's anything that we can do about that as a city, but thanks for the conversation.
Thank you very much. Is there any additional public comment? Seeing none, Madam Chair?
Go ahead.
We'll close public comment.
Public comment is closed. Great. Thank you.
Great. I want to thank everyone. I think this was a really thoughtful discussion, both on the department side and folks in the community. Sergeant Freeman, could I sort of put you on the spot? But in terms of the sort of mega chop shop that this gentleman referenced by Isla Creek Park, is the department familiar with that situation?
Please come into the microphone.
I'm sure they are. I'm sure it's the Southern District, Soma area, and being up in the Richmond District, I can't leave the Richmond District to go down to the Southern District to do anything. I would think they're aware of it, but again, I think they run into the same problems that we discussed. They go out there, respond to a call for service. They, look around, see if anything potentially has been reported stolen. They don't find anything. They leave, or they tell the guy to dismantle the chop shop. He goes, a half a mile down the road and sets up again the next day.
So if you have, sort of apropos what we were talking about before, if you come across someone who has 50 bikes, either together or dismantled, if they don't match what's reported as stolen, then it's just they could just have that.
Right, and there's nothing more than what I'd like to do is confiscate this stuff, book it as evidence or book it as property for safekeeping and see if we can't start matching owners, but our hands are kind of tied in doing that.
Okay, that's very helpful to know. Okay, thank you very much.
I have a quick question for you, Sergeant. When you dismantle one of the larger chop shop operations, or even the smaller ones, and they move down the road, or they move to another location, how does the word get out? How is the owner of the chop shop communicating to the larger, to its customers?
Well, I'll give you an example. There was a fairly large chop shop under the Division 13th Street corridor where you come off the ramp.
I'm very familiar with it.
Right,
absolutely.
So I've been out that way no less than probably 40 times. The gentleman that ran that whole place was arrested probably no less than 50 times, all on varying offenses. Everybody in the city knows him. Everybody will find him. You're going to be in that area. They all bring him whatever it is, they steal. And people find who he is. He's got a reputation, so
And when maybe you can kind of walk me through a little bit like the life cycle. So I find a bike, one or two, I chop it up, or do I bring this bike to this particular person?
I guess it depends. So
is there money exchange?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
High-end all bikes get stolen, but let's start with the high-end bike. A high-end bike gets stolen off the street. It's worth a lot of money. It goes to the chop shop. Money's exchanged. Those bikes usually end up going out on trucks to flea markets in the East Bay, or first they go to storage lockers, and then they go to trucks out into the East Bay for flea markets, or to the South Bay for flea markets, where they're purchased by someone else for almost full price, and then they go back up online again, where they're sold for full price. Bikes that get chopped are usually the lower-end bikes. They get stolen off the street. They get brought to the chop shop in exchange for money. It's either broken down for parts and then reassembled to try and disguise the way the bike looks, and then it's resold to somebody that walks in and says, I want to buy that or that or that. So it's kind of this vicious cycle, and it's usually for drug money.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I have no other questions. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank
Supervisor
you.
Weiner.
Thank you. So this has been an extraordinarily helpful hearing. I think it's been illuminating to us, but also I think for the public. It's an issue that I tend to stay very focused on and look forward to working with the department and with the community to try to really address this very serious issue. And so with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to move to file this hearing.
All right. A motion was made by Supervisor Weiner to file this hearing. Is there a second? And without objection, this motion passes unanimously. Or it'll be filed. There we go. Thank you. Mr. Clerk, is there anything else before this body?
That completes the agenda.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This committee is adjourned.